They called her broken, worthless, a stain on her bloodline that needed erasing. Selene Vale had survived the kind of public humiliation that destroyed wolves twice as strong, cast out by her own mate, stripped of her name, left to freeze in exile while the Empire laughed. But here's what those bastards didn't know. The discarded ones don't stay down forever. Some rise, some burn, and some? They become the exact thing their enemies feared most. Stick with me till the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments so I know my pack is out there watching. The northern cliffs of Vareth smelled like death and salt water. Selene Vale had been lying in the ruins of the frozen sanctuary for 3 days when the storm finally came to finish what her former territory started. Ice crusted her eyelashes. Her fingers had gone numb hours ago, maybe longer. Time stopped meaning much when your body decided dying was easier than fighting. She didn't remember crawling into the crumbled temple, didn't remember the exact moment her legs gave out, or when the shaking turned violent enough to crack her teeth together. What she remembered was Cassiel Arden's face when he rejected their bond in front of the entire military assembly. Lord Cassiel fucking Arden, golden heir to the Arden dynasty. The male every Omega dreamed about and every Alpha respected. The man who'd whispered promises against her throat in darkness, who'd marked her skin with his scent and called her his future. Until he didn't. The rejection ceremony happened during the spring conclave when all the great houses gathered to formalize bonds and alliances. Cassiel stood on that raised platform in full military regalia, surrounded by generals and nobles dripping in silk and steel, and he looked at Selene like she was something rotting he'd discovered on his boot. "I reject the bond with Selene Vale," he'd announced, voice carrying across the marble courtyard. "She lacks the strength required to stand beside House Arden. Her bloodline offers nothing. Her presence diminishes my standing. No explanation beyond that, no apology, just cold aristocratic dismissal delivered with surgical precision while 300 witnesses watched her world collapse." The bond snapped like a bone breaking inside her chest. Selene dropped to her knees right there on the stone floor, unable to breathe through the agony tearing through her nervous system. Someone laughed. Others whispered. A few looked away in secondhand embarrassment. Cassiel walked out without a backward glance. Her own family disowned her within hours. The Vale name couldn't afford association with public humiliation. They stripped her belongings, erased her from territory records, and dumped her outside the borders with nothing but the clothes she wore and a warning never to return. She was 23 years old. No mate, no pack, no future. So she walked north until the cold seemed like mercy. Now the storm howled through the broken sanctuary walls, and Selene realized with distant clarity that she'd finally stopped shivering. That meant the end was close. Hypothermia shut down the body in stages, and once the shaking stopped, you had maybe minutes left. Good. She closed her eyes. The wind screamed. Then everything went silent. Not peaceful silent, wrong silent, like the world held its breath before something massive arrived. Selene forced her eyes open through the ice crusting her lashes and saw a figure standing in the sanctuary entrance. Tall, broad-shouldered, absolutely still despite the blizzard raging behind him. The figure moved closer, and torchlight from somewhere outside caught his features. Sharp, brutal, handsome in the way a blade was handsome. All edges and danger. King Draven Kaelor. Every wolf in the Empire knew that face. The Alpha Sovereign who'd crushed 3 rebellions before his 25th birthday. The male whose name alone made generals nervous and nobles compliant. He shouldn't be here. Kings didn't wander frozen wastelands searching ruins. Draven crouched beside her, and his scent hit like a physical force. Pine and smoke, and something darker underneath. Power that made her hindbrain scream conflicting instructions to submit and run simultaneously. He studied her with eyes the color of winter storms. "You're dying," he said. Not a question. Selene tried to speak, but her jaw wouldn't cooperate. She managed something between a nod and a spasm. Draven reached out and touched her throat, feeling for a pulse. His fingers were warm, impossibly warm, like holding on to life itself. "Do you want to survive?" he asked quietly. The question seemed absurd. She was already dead. Her body just hadn't finished the paperwork. But something in his tone made her focus, made her drag enough air into her frozen lungs to whisper, "Why?" His expression didn't change. "Answer first." Selene thought about Cassiel's face when he rejected her, thought about her family erasing her existence, thought about every noble who'd watched her humiliation like entertainment. "Yes," she rasped, "I want to survive." Draven lifted her like she weighed nothing, like she wasn't a dying stranger covered in frost and failure. "Then you'll live," he said, and he carried her out of the ruins into the storm. Consciousness returned in pieces. Warmth first, then softness, then the disorienting realization that she was lying in the most comfortable bed she'd ever touched. Selene's eyes cracked open to find herself staring at a ceiling painted with constellations in silver leaf. Silk sheets covered her body. The room around her looked like something from a fever dream, black stone walls inlaid with veins of gold, furniture carved from dark wood that probably cost more than her entire former territory. She sat up too fast, and her head spun viciously. A woman appeared beside the bed immediately. Older. Gray-streaked hair pulled severe, eyes that missed nothing. "Easy," the woman said. "You've been unconscious for 2 days. Your body's still recovering from hypothermia." "Where am I?" "Nightgrave Citadel." The woman poured water from a crystal pitcher. "You're in the king's private wing." Selene took the glass with shaking hands. The water tasted like mountain springs and something faintly metallic, probably gold-filtered, knowing this place. "Why?" she asked. "His Majesty doesn't explain himself to me," the woman replied crisply. "I'm Maven, head of household staff. You're under my care until you're well enough to meet with the king. I want to leave." Maven's expression didn't shift. "That's not possible." "I'm a prisoner?" "You're a guest." Maven moved to the wardrobe and began pulling out clothes. "There's a difference. Prisoners occupy the dungeons 3 levels below. Guests occupy the royal quarters and receive the finest care in the Empire." "The finest care?" "Right. Because powerful males rescued dying Omegas out of kindness and expected nothing in return." Selene's hands tightened on the glass. "What does he want from me?" "I imagine," Maven said, laying out a gown that probably cost more than Selene's former dowry. "He'll tell you himself." 3 days passed before Draven summoned her. 3 days of Maven bringing meals Selene barely touched. 3 days of staring at gold-veined walls while her mind circled the same questions on repeat. 3 days of remembering Cassiel's rejection and wondering if death in the frozen sanctuary might have been kinder than whatever waited here. On the 4th morning, Maven arrived with a dress of deep crimson and instructions to be ready within the hour. The gown fit perfectly. Too perfectly. Like someone had taken measurements while she was unconscious and commissioned it specifically for her body. Selene hated how beautiful it made her look. Maven led her through corridors that felt designed to intimidate. Vaulted ceilings disappeared into shadow. Torches burned in iron sconces, casting everything in shades of amber and blood. Soldiers stood at intervals wearing black armor and expressions that suggested they'd killed before breakfast and would again before dinner. They passed through a set of massive doors into what had to be a throne room. The space stretched impossibly vast. Black marble floors reflected torchlight like dark water. Columns thick as ancient trees marched toward a raised dais at the far end where a throne of obsidian and steel sat empty. Draven stood beside it. He wore black from throat to boots. No crown, no ostentatious jewelry, just severe tailoring and the kind of presence that made the massive room feel suddenly smaller. Maven bowed and withdrew, leaving Selene standing alone in the center of the throne room like an offering. Draven descended the dais steps with predatory grace. He stopped 10 feet away, studying her with the same intensity he'd shown in the frozen sanctuary. Like she was a puzzle he intended to solve through sheer force of observation. "You're recovered," he said. "Alive, at least." Selene kept her voice steady, which I'm sure wasn't accidental. "No," Draven agreed. It wasn't. Silence stretched between them. Selene refused to look away first, even though every instinct screamed at her to lower her gaze before an alpha king who could end her life with a gesture. "Why did you save me?" she asked finally. "Because you were dying." "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting tonight." Draven moved closer, circling her slowly. "What I want to know is why you were dying in a forgotten sanctuary at the edge of the Empire, instead of wrapped in silk somewhere warm." "You don't know?" I know Lord Cassiel Arden rejected your bond publicly during the spring conclave. I know your family disowned you immediately after. I know the territory records list you as deceased. He stopped directly in front of her. What I don't know is why you chose freezing over survival. Heat crawled up Selene's throat, shame and fury mixing into something that tasted like copper. I didn't choose freezing, she said quietly. I chose not fighting anymore. Because of rejection? Draven's tone held no sympathy. Because one aristocratic bastard decided you weren't valuable enough? You wouldn't understand. Try me, Selene laughed, sharp and bitter. You're the Alpha King. You've never been told you're worthless, never been publicly stripped of everything you thought defined you, never felt your own family look at you like garbage they couldn't dispose of fast enough. You're right, Draven said. I've only watched my father poisoned by men he trusted. Only inherited a fracturing empire at 19 while nobles circled like vultures. Only spent the last decade proving myself through blood because kings who show weakness end up buried in unmarked graves. He tilted his head. But you're right. I wouldn't understand rejection. The words hit harder than a slap. Selene felt something crack open in her chest. Not the bond breaking again. Something different. Something that felt like recognition. Why am I here? She whispered. Draven stepped closer, close enough that his scent wrapped around her like smoke. Because I saw something in you, he said quietly. Something everyone else missed. What? Power. The word hung between them like a blade. I'm Omega, Selene said. I have no power. That's what they told you. Draven's gaze pinned her in place. That's what the Empire teaches. That's the lie holding this entire fucking system together. But I've seen real power, and it has nothing to do with bloodline or designation. Then what is it? Survival. His voice dropped lower. The ability to endure what should break you and still stand. That's power. And you have it. Selene wanted to argue, wanted to throw his words back and list every way she'd failed, but she couldn't speak past the tightness in her throat. I'm offering you a choice, Draven continued. Return to the territories as Selene Vale, disgraced and discarded, carrying your humiliation until time eventually buries you. Or stay here and become something different, something stronger. As what? Selene forced the question out. Your mistress? Your political pawn? As a survivor? Draven stepped back, giving her space. I need people around me who understand what it means to lose everything and choose to keep fighting anyway. People who aren't comfortable or complacent or corrupted by generations of inherited privilege. You've been destroyed and rebuilt yourself from nothing. That makes you more valuable than every perfumed noble in this citadel. You saved me because you think I'm useful? I saved you because I recognize potential when I see it. He turned toward the throne. Now you decide what happens next. The door's behind you. Maven will provide travel arrangements if you want to leave. Or you stay, and we see what you're actually capable of when you stop defining yourself by other people's judgments. Selene looked at the massive doors leading out of the throne room, looked at freedom and uncertainty and the vast, terrible empire waiting beyond. Then she looked at Draven standing beside the obsidian throne. If I stay, she said slowly, I'm not here to be saved, I'm not here to be grateful, and I'm sure as hell not here to replace whatever you lost. Good, Draven replied. I don't need another casualty. I need someone dangerous. Something shifted in the air between them, something that felt like the beginning of a bargain neither of them fully understood yet. Then I stay, Selene said. Draven nodded once. Training starts tomorrow at dawn. Don't be late. Dawn came like a hammer to the skull. Selene barely slept, caught between exhaustion and the adrenaline still singing through her veins from the throne room conversation. When Maven arrived with training clothes, leather and canvas designed for movement, not seduction, she felt like she'd closed her eyes 5 minutes ago. Maven led her through different corridors this time, down instead of across. The air grew colder, damper. They descended into what had to be the Citadel's lower levels, where luxury gave way to function. They emerged into a massive underground training yard. The space stretched easily 100 yards across. Weapon racks lined the walls. Training dummies leaked straw from sword cuts. Sand covered the floor, dark with old bloodstains that no amount of raking could fully erase. Dozens of soldiers drilled in formation, their movements synchronized and brutal. The sound of steel meeting steel rang through the chamber like a forge. A man stood at the center of the chaos, barking orders that snapped through the air like whip cracks. General Kaelor. Selene recognized him from reputation. Everyone did. The scarred commander who'd served 3 kings and survived wars that wiped out entire bloodlines. His face looked like someone had taken a knife to granite. All harsh planes and old damage barely healed. He turned as Maven and Selene approached. His gaze raked over Selene with the kind of assessment usually reserved for livestock at market. "This her?" he asked Maven. "Her name is Selene," Maven replied coolly. "And yes," Kaelor grunted. "His Majesty said to train her. Didn't say train her gently." "I wouldn't expect gentle," Selene said before she could stop herself. Kaelor's scarred eyebrow rose. "You talk back already. That's either bravery or stupidity. We'll find out which." He gestured toward the sparring circles. "Strip the fancy leather. You train in basics first." Selene glanced at Maven, who simply nodded and withdrew, leaving her alone with the general and 50 soldiers who'd paused their drills to watch the spectacle. She stripped down to the thin canvas undershirt and pants, feeling their eyes track every movement. Kaelor tossed her toward the nearest sparring circle, where a female soldier waited. The woman stood easily 6 inches taller than Selene, built like she'd been carved from oak and violence. "Mira," Kaelor announced. "Show our guest what combat looks like." Mira smiled. It wasn't kind. The fight lasted maybe 30 seconds. Mira moved like water and hit like stone. Selene barely raised her guard before she was on her back in the sand, lungs empty, vision sparking. Laughter rippled through the watching soldiers. "Again," Kaelor said. Selene dragged herself upright. Mira knocked her down faster this time. "Again!" Up, down. The sand tasted like iron and humiliation. Again. Her ribs screamed. Her jaw felt loose. Blood from her split lip painted her teeth. Again. Selene stayed down this time, gasping like a landed fish while the training yard spun overhead. Kaelor's boots appeared in her peripheral vision. "You done?" he asked. She wanted to say yes, wanted to crawl back to the royal quarters and hide in silk sheets until this nightmare ended. Instead, she thought about Cassiel's face during the rejection, thought about her family erasing her, thought about dying alone in frozen ruins because she believed their version of her worth. Selene pushed herself up on shaking arms. "No," she rasped. Kaelor's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes that might have been approval. "Then stop fighting like prey," he said. "You want to survive in this empire? Stop apologizing for taking up space. Mira, go again, and this time, stop pulling your hits." The training continued for 6 hours straight. By the time Kaelor finally dismissed her, Selene couldn't tell blood from sweat. Everything hurt. Her body had apparently decided dying would be preferable to standing, and honestly, she agreed. Maven waited at the edge of the training yard with water, and a look that suggested she'd seen this exact scene play out before. "Can you walk?" Maven asked. "Barely." "Good enough." Maven handed over the water skin. "Drink. Then we're meeting with the royal physician." The physician turned out to be a thin man named Corwin, with gentle hands and zero patience for complaints. He cleaned Selene's cuts, wrapped her ribs, and provided a jar of salve that smelled like pine and numbed pain on contact. "You'll be back in training tomorrow," Corwin said, not making it a question. "Apparently." "Then sleep tonight. Your body needs to heal." Selene almost laughed. Sleep. Right. Like her brain would shut off after today. But back in the royal quarters, exhaustion hit like a drug. She collapsed onto the silk sheets, still wearing half her training clothes, and fell into darkness immediately. She dreamed of frozen sanctuaries and golden thrones, of Cassiel's face twisting into Draven's, of her own hands covered in blood she couldn't wash clean. When she woke, it was still dark outside. Someone sat in the chair beside her bed. Draven. Selene jerked upright, ignoring how her ribs protested. "What are you doing here?" "Checking on my investment." He lounged in the chair like he owned it, which he did. He owned everything in this citadel, including probably her life at this point. "Your investment got destroyed today. Your investment survived." Draven's gaze tracked the bandages visible above her collar. "Kaelor said you didn't quit. Would it matter if I did?" Yes. The simple honesty in his voice caught her off guard. Why? Selene asked. Because quitting is easy, Draven said. Everyone quits eventually when the pain gets bad enough, but the ones who don't? The ones who keep standing when they should stay down? Those are the people who change empires. I'm not trying to change anything. I'm just trying not to die. Same thing, Draven replied. Every empire dies unless someone refuses to let it. Selene studied him in the darkness. You really believe that? I've watched good rulers fall because they were too kind to survive. I've watched bad rulers thrive because they understood cruelty better than mercy. He leaned forward slightly. The empire doesn't need another good king. It needs rulers willing to make the choices no one else can stomach. Choices like throwing broken Omegas into combat training until they either toughen up or shatter. Choices like giving broken Omegas the chance to discover they were never actually broken. Draven stood. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's worse. He moved toward the door. Draven, Selene called. He paused. Why do you care if I survive this? He looked back at her, and for just a moment his expression shifted into something that almost resembled vulnerability. Because everyone in this citadel is here because of bloodline or ambition or fear, he said quietly. You're here because you chose survival over surrender when you had every reason to quit. That makes you the most dangerous person in Nightgrave. Then he was gone. Selene lay back in the silk sheets, staring at the constellation ceiling, and wondered what the hell she'd agreed to. The weeks blurred together into an endless cycle of violence and recovery. Every morning at dawn, Kaelor dragged her into the training yards. Every morning, she got her ass handed to her by soldiers who'd been fighting since before she was born. Every evening, she crawled back to the royal quarters covered in new bruises blooming over old ones. But something started changing. Her body adapted. Muscles she didn't know existed began responding faster. She learned to read Mira's tells before the hits landed, learned when to block and when to roll, learned that pain was temporary, but quitting lasted forever. The soldiers stopped laughing, started watching instead. On the 13th day, she lasted 2 full minutes against Mira before going down. On the 20th day, she drew blood. Kaelor said nothing, but his nods grew fractionally longer. Draven watched from the shadows sometimes. Selene felt his presence like heat against her back, but he never interfered, never offered comfort or praise, just watched. At night, she started noticing other things about Nightgrave's citadel. The way servants moved through halls like ghosts. The way nobles in their fine clothes smiled with teeth too sharp. The way even the generals looked over their shoulders before speaking freely. The entire palace operated on fear dressed in velvet, and Draven stood at the center of it all, cold-eyed and absolutely certain. Maven explained some of it during quiet moments while treating Selene's injuries. The king inherited chaos, Maven said one evening while applying salve to Selene's shoulders. His father was poisoned by his own advisors 6 years ago. Draven was 19 when he took the throne, and half the empire tried to tear him apart before he finished his first year. How did he survive? By being more ruthless than everyone else. Maven's hands paused. He executed the conspirators publicly. 73 men and women hanged in the central square. Then he hunted down their families and stripped them of titles and land. Selene's stomach turned. That's necessary, Maven interrupted. The alternative was civil war. Millions dead instead of dozens. Sometimes mercy costs more than cruelty. You sound like him. I served his father before him and his grandfather before that. Maven resumed working the salve into Selene's muscles. I've watched 3 generations of Kaelor kings try to hold this empire together. Only one succeeded, and he succeeded because he understood that power without teeth is just pretty decoration. Selene thought about that later while staring at her ceiling constellations. Was there really a difference between strength and cruelty? Between necessary violence and sadism? She didn't have answers, but she was starting to understand why Draven moved through the world like a blade, sharp, cold, designed to cut. On the 31st day of training, everything changed. Selene arrived at the yards to find Kaelor standing beside a weapons rack instead of in the sparring circle. You're done getting beaten, he announced. Time to learn how to return the favor. He handed her a training sword. The weapon felt impossibly heavy in her grip. She'd never held a real blade before. Omegas in her former territory weren't permitted weapons. I don't know how. Then you'll learn. Valor drew his own practice blade. First lesson. Stop gripping like you're afraid it'll bite you. The sword is a tool. Respect it, but don't fear it. For the next 3 hours, he drilled her on basic forms until her shoulders screamed and her hands blistered. By the end, she could barely lift the blade, but she'd learned something. She'd learned that weapons made her feel less helpless. That night, Draven summoned her again. Not to the throne room this time. To his private study, a smaller space lined with books and maps and correspondence sealed with wax and noble crests. He sat behind a massive desk covered in documents. Sit, he said without looking up. Selene lowered herself into the chair across from him, hyper-aware of her training clothes and the smell of sweat and weapon oil clinging to her skin. Draven finished whatever he was reading and finally met her gaze. Valor says you're progressing faster than expected. I'm surviving. Same thing. He leaned back. Which means it's time we discussed why you're actually here. Selene's pulse kicked up. I thought I was here because you saw potential. You are. Draven gestured at the documents covering his desk. These are intelligence reports from every major territory in the Empire. You want to know what they all have in common? What? They're all asking about you. The words hit like cold water. What? Rumors spread fast in Nightgrave. The mysterious Omega living in the King's Wing. The disgraced exile training with the Royal Guard. Every noble family wants to know who you are and why I'm investing resources in you. Selene's throat tightened. What are you telling them? Nothing. Draven's expression hardened. Which makes them more desperate. Nothing terrifies nobles like information they don't control. I don't understand. Why would they care about me? Because proximity to power is power. He stood, moving around the desk to lean against the front edge. Every person in this citadel is here for a reason. Generals earned their positions through bloodshed. Nobles purchased theirs through gold and marriage alliances. Servants inherited their roles from parents and grandparents. But you? You appeared from nowhere. You have no title, no wealth, no bloodline worth mentioning, and yet the king personally brought you into the heart of the Empire. Understanding crashed over her. They think I'm your weakness. They think you're leverage. Draven crossed his arms. Which means eventually someone will try to use you against me. Fear spiked cold through her chest. Then send me away. No. Why not? Because I don't make decisions based on fear. He met her gaze steadily. And because I'm betting you're capable of becoming something more dangerous than leverage. Like what? Like someone who survives assassination attempts and comes out stronger. The casual way he said it made Selene's stomach drop. You think someone's going to try to kill me? I know they will. Draven straightened. The question is whether you'll be ready. I've been training for a month. Training to fight, not survive. He moved closer. Fighting is what happens in controlled spaces with rules and witnesses. Survival is what happens in darkness when someone slips poison in your wine or a blade between your ribs while you sleep. Different skills entirely. Then teach me. I am. Draven's voice dropped. Starting now. From this moment forward, you trust no one completely. Not the servants bringing your food, not the soldiers training beside you, not even Maven. Maven's been nothing but kind. Maven serves the throne, not you. If I ordered her to poison your breakfast, she'd do it without hesitation. He caught her expression. I won't. But you need to understand how loyalty works in places like this. People serve power, not individuals. The moment you become a liability instead of an asset, even your allies become enemies. The words settled like stones in her gut. You're trying to scare me. I'm trying to prepare you. Draven returned to his desk. The Empire is watching now. Every move you make gets analyzed. Every word you speak gets reported. You want to survive? Stop thinking like prey and start thinking like a predator. I don't want to become like them. You already are, Draven said quietly. The moment you chose survival over surrender in that frozen sanctuary, you became something the Empire doesn't expect. A discarded Omega refusing to stay discarded. That's dangerous. Because it threatens their power? Because it threatens their story. He pulled another document from the pile. The Empire runs on stories. Alphas are strong. Omegas are weak. Nobles deserve privilege. Bloodlines determine worth. Every law, every tradition, every assumption that holds this entire structure together relies on those stories staying true. And I'm breaking the story. You're proving the story is a lie. Draven looked up. Which means either the Empire destroys you, or you help me rebuild it into something that doesn't require lies to function. Selene stared at him. That's why you saved me. Not because of potential, because you're planning a war. I've been at war since I took this throne. His expression hardened. The question is whether you're willing to fight beside me. Before Selene could answer, someone pounded on the study door. Draven's hand went to the blade at his hip. Enter. A soldier burst through, chest heaving. Your Majesty, Southern Barracks, we're under attack. Everything went cold. Draven moved like violence given form, grabbing weapons from behind his desk. How many? Unclear. Maybe 20 hostiles. They breached during shift change. Multiple casualties already. Lock down the Citadel. Get General Valor. Sir? The soldier's face went pale. General Valor is in the barracks. He's down. We can't reach him. Silence crashed through the study. Then Draven turned to Selene. Stay here. Don't open this door for anyone but me. He moved toward the exit. Selene stood. Take me with you. No. I can help. You're not ready for this. Draven's voice cut like steel. Stay. Here. Then he was gone, the soldier on his heels. Selene stood alone in the study, heart hammering, every instinct screaming at her to run or fight or do something besides wait helplessly. The sounds of combat drifted up from below. Shouts, steel clashing, something that might have been screaming. She thought about Draven's words. Stop thinking like prey. Start thinking like a predator. Thought about Valor down in the barracks, possibly dying while she hid in a study like a coward. Selene grabbed a letter opener from Draven's desk. It wasn't much, but it was sharp, and she was done being helpless. She opened the study door and ran toward the sounds of war. The corridors leading to the southern barracks descended through stone passages lit by torches that guttered in drafts smelling like smoke and copper. Selene ran past servants pressed against walls, past soldiers rushing toward the fight with weapons drawn. Nobody stopped her. Nobody even seemed to notice her in the chaos. She reached the barracks level and found hell. Bodies littered the training yard, some still moving, some very definitely not. Blood pooled in the sand, dark and spreading. The fighting concentrated near the far end where soldiers in black armor battled against attackers wearing no insignia at all. Assassins. Professional killers hired to strike fast and vanish. Selene's gaze swept the carnage and locked onto a figure crumpled near the weapon racks. Valor. The general lay in spreading crimson, one hand pressed to a wound in his side that leaked between his fingers. Selene didn't think. She ran. An assassin spotted her, blade rising. Selene dodged on instinct, felt steel whisper past her ribs close enough to slice fabric. She kept moving, sliding in blood-slicked sand, reaching Valor just as another attacker closed in. Get back, Valor rasped, trying to raise his own weapon with hands that shook. The assassin lunged. Selene threw herself between them. The blade would have carved through her throat, except something impossible happened. Light erupted from her skin, blinding, burning, golden radiance that exploded outward like a shockwave, catching the assassin mid-strike and hurling him backward into a stone pillar with bone-snapping force. The entire barracks went silent. Every soldier, every assassin, every dying man and survivor stared at Selene kneeling in blood and light, both hands pressed against Valor's wound as golden energy poured from her palms into his torn flesh. The wound began closing, skin knitting together, blood flow stopping, color returning to Valor's face as dying transformed into healing, transformed into impossible survival. Selene felt the power draining from her like water through a sieve. Exhaustion crashed over her in waves. Her vision sparked and darkened, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The light kept flowing until Valor's wound sealed completely, leaving nothing but healed skin and old scars. Then the power cut off like a severed rope, and Selene collapsed forward into darkness. The last thing she heard was Draven's voice, sharp with something that might have been shock or might have been recognition. Get her to the physician, now, and seal this citadel completely. Nobody speaks about what just happened. That's an order. Then nothing. Selene woke in her quarters 3 days later. Maven sat beside the bed, looking older and more worried than Selene had ever seen her. What happened? Selene's voice came out like gravel. You healed General Kaelor. Maven's hands twisted in her lap. You saved his life with power nobody knew you possessed. Memory crashed back. The barracks, the blood, the light pouring from her hands like liquid sunlight. I don't understand. Neither do we. Maven's expression remained carefully neutral. The king has sealed all information about the attack. Nobody outside Nightgrave knows what you did. But inside these walls, every soldier who witnessed it is talking, and the talk is dangerous. Why? Maven leaned closer, voice dropping. Because there's only one thing capable of healing like that. Only one power that manifests as golden light and restores dying flesh. What? A sovereign luminary. The words came out like a confession. A bloodline believed extinct for 3 centuries. A power capable of preserving entire armies or destroying them depending on whose hands wielded it. Selene's world tilted. That's impossible. You're not just anything anymore. Maven stood. The king wants to see you. Can you walk? Selene tested her legs. Everything felt weak, but functional. Maven helped her into a robe and led her through empty corridors. No servants, no soldiers, just silence that felt heavier than stone. They reached Draven's study. Maven knocked once and withdrew, leaving Selene alone. Come in, Draven called. Selene entered and found him standing at the window overlooking the citadel grounds. He didn't turn immediately. Close the door. She did. Silence stretched. Finally, Draven spoke, still not turning. How long have you known? I didn't. Selene's voice shook. I swear, I didn't know I could do that. Not possible. Power like that doesn't just appear. I've never done anything like it before. Never even felt anything close to that. She moved closer. Please, you have to believe me. Draven finally turned. His expression remained unreadable, but tension lined his shoulders. Do you understand what you are? He asked quietly. Maven said, Maven told you the legend. I'm telling you the reality. He crossed the study in 3 strides, standing close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. A sovereign luminary doesn't just heal, they preserve. They can keep entire bloodlines alive through wars that should wipe them out. They can tip the balance of power so completely that nations rise or fall based on whose side they choose. I didn't choose anything. You chose to run toward danger instead of hiding. His hands gripped her shoulders, not gently. You chose to put yourself between death and someone you barely know. That choice activated power you didn't even know you had. So what happens now? Selene whispered. You lock me away? Use me as a weapon? Sell me to the highest bidder? Now, Draven said, voice dropping dangerously low. Every ruler in this empire is going to want you. Every general, every noble house desperate for advantage. You've become the most valuable asset in Vareth, and I'm the only thing standing between you and a war that would tear this kingdom apart. Then let me go. Send me away before... Too late. His grip tightened. The moment you healed Kaelor, you became mine. Not by choice. By necessity. Because if any other territory gets their hands on you, they'll use you to destroy everything I've built. So I'm a prisoner after all. You're a queen, Draven corrected. Whether you wanted the crown or not. The words hung between them like a sentence. I don't want to be a queen, and I didn't want to be a king who rules through fear. Draven released her shoulders. But we don't choose the roles survival forces on us. We just decide whether we're strong enough to survive them. Selene's legs felt weak. What if I can't? Then we both die. Draven returned to his desk. Because I'm not giving you up. Not to nobles. Not to generals. Not to anyone who thinks they can use you as a tool. Why? He looked up, and for just a moment the mask cracked enough to reveal something human underneath. Because for the first time since I took this throne, I've found someone who might actually survive standing beside me, he said quietly. And I'll burn this entire empire to ash before I let them take that away. Before Selene could respond, before she could process the weight of that confession, the study door exploded inward. 3 soldiers burst through wearing royal guard armor, but their eyes held something wrong. Something cold and calculated. Traitors. The first one lunged at Draven with blade drawn. The second and third moved towards Selene. Draven's sword cleared its sheath faster than thought, meeting the first attacker's strike with force that sent sparks flying. They crashed together in a tangle of steel and violence. The other 2 closed on Selene. She had no weapon, no training for this, no time to think. One of them grabbed her arm, dragging her toward the shattered door. The other raised his blade to ensure cooperation. Selene felt terror spike through her veins, felt something else rising with it, that golden light from the barracks, that impossible power she didn't understand. It exploded outward in a wave of radiance that sent both attackers flying backward, armor cracking, bones breaking. Draven finished his opponent with brutal efficiency and spun towards Selene just as she collapsed, power draining from her like water through open hands. He caught her before she hit the floor. "Get the physician!" Draven roared toward the hallway where legitimate guards were finally arriving. "Lock down every entrance. Find whoever sent these traitors and bring them to me alive." Selene's vision blurred. "They came for me." "I know. Because of what I am." "Yes." Draven lifted her effortlessly. "And it's only going to get worse. Then I should protect you." His voice turned granite. "And that's exactly what I'm going to do, even if I have to wage war against my entire kingdom to make it happen." Selene wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she wasn't worth that price, but exhaustion dragged her down into darkness before she could form the words. Her last conscious thought was simple and terrifying. She'd survived rejection and exile and freezing death, but she had no idea how to survive being the thing everyone wanted to possess. Consciousness returned slowly, dragging Selene back through layers of exhaustion that felt like drowning in reverse. Her body ached everywhere. Not the sharp pain of fresh injury, but the deep bone weariness that came from pushing past every natural limit. She opened her eyes to find herself back in the royal quarters, afternoon light slanting through windows she didn't remember having curtains before. They were drawn now, heavy fabric blocking most of the outside world. Draven sat in the chair beside her bed, not lounging this time, alert. Tension visible in the set of his shoulders like he'd been sitting guard for hours and intended to continue indefinitely. Their eyes met. "How long?" Selene's voice came out rough. 18 hours since the attack." Draven didn't move. "Corwin says your body's recovering, but the power drain was severe. You could have killed yourself healing Vaelor that way. He would have died otherwise." "Yes." No judgment in the word, just acknowledgement of fact. "Which is why half my generals want to build a temple around you, and the other half want you locked in the deepest vault in Nightgrave, where nobody can ever use you against me." Selene pushed herself upright despite her body's protests. The silk sheets pooled around her waist. Someone had changed her into clean clothes while she was unconscious, and the thought of servants undressing her while she lay helpless made her skin crawl. "What do you want?" she asked. Draven's gaze remained steady. "I want you alive and uncaptured. Everything else is negotiable." "That's not an answer." "And it's the only honest one I have." He finally moved, leaning forward with forearms braced on his knees. "The traitors who attacked us? They were royal guard, men who'd served this throne for years. Someone inside Nightgrave got to them. Someone close enough to know you'd be in my study. Close enough to coordinate an assault during the exact window when most of my forces were occupied with the barracks massacre." The implications settled like ice in Selene's stomach. The barracks attack was a distraction. A very effective one. Draven's jaw tightened. "They sacrificed 20 assassins and killed a dozen of my soldiers just to create an opening to take you. That level of planning, that level of resources invested? Whoever's behind this isn't some opportunistic noble. This is coordinated, funded, patient. Any idea who? 3 possibilities. All dangerous." He ticked them off with the clinical precision of someone who'd spent hours analyzing threats. "Lord Malrek Kaelor, my uncle. He was regent before I came of age and never forgave me for surviving long enough to claim the throne. He controls significant military resources and has backing from traditionalist houses who think I'm too young and too ruthless. You said 3 possibilities. The Arden dynasty." Draven watched her face carefully. Your former mate's family. They have wealth, connections, and a vested interest in controlling luminary power. If they knew what you were before the rejection, this entire thing could have been orchestrated to isolate you. The thought made Selene's throat tighten. Cassiel's face during the rejection ceremony. The cold calculation in his eyes. Had he known? Had the humiliation been designed to break her down, make her vulnerable, prepare her for capture? "Who's the third?" she asked. "Duke Varansk of the Southern Reaches. He's been consolidating power for years through marriage alliances and economic pressure. If he controls a sovereign luminary, he becomes the single most powerful noble in the empire outside the royal bloodline." Draven's expression hardened. "And he's ambitious enough to believe he could take my throne if he had the right weapon." "I'm not a weapon. Tell that to everyone who wants to use you as one." Draven stood, moving to the window. He pulled the curtain aside slightly, looking down at the citadel grounds below. "I've tripled security. Nobody enters the royal wing without my personal authorization. I've placed guards I trust with my life outside your door, but trust only goes so far when enough gold is involved. So I'm a prisoner now. You're protected." He dropped the curtain back in place. "There's a difference. Feels the same from inside." Draven turned back to her. "Would you prefer I let you wander the citadel freely so the next assassination attempt has an easier target?" "I'd prefer honesty." Selene met his gaze without flinching. "You said I was here because of potential, because you saw power. But now I'm here because you can't afford to let anyone else have me. That's possession, not protection." Silence stretched between them like a blade. When Draven spoke again, his voice carried an edge that felt dangerous. "You want honesty? Fine. Yes, I'm keeping you here because losing you to an enemy would destabilize everything I've built. Yes, your value as a luminary makes you a strategic asset I can't afford to lose. But here's the part that matters more than any of that." He crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping close enough that she had to look up to maintain eye contact. "I watched you run toward danger when everyone else ran away," he said quietly. "I watched you throw yourself between death and a man you barely know because saving him felt more important than safety. That's not strategy. That's not calculation. That's something most people in the Citadel lost years ago, if they ever had it at all." "What?" "Courage that isn't conditional." Draven's gaze pinned her in place. "The kind that doesn't stop to calculate cost or benefit. The kind that just acts because the alternative is unconscionable. You can call it possession if you want, but from where I'm standing, I'm protecting the first person I've met in years who might actually deserve to survive this empire." The words hit harder than any training yard beating. Selene's throat felt tight. "You don't know me well enough to say that. I know you better than you think." Draven stepped back, giving her space. "I've spent years surrounded by people who'd sell their own children for advancement, who smile while plotting murder, who perform loyalty as long as it's profitable. You healed a dying general without thinking about what it would cost you. That tells me everything I need to know." Before Selene could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Draven's hand went to his blade instinctively. "Who?" "Maven, your majesty." Tension eased fractionally. Draven crossed to the door and opened it just wide enough for Maven to slip through before closing it again. Maven carried a covered tray that smelled like food. She set it on the table beside the bed and turned to Selene with an expression that somehow managed to be both concerned and professionally neutral. "You need to eat," Maven said. "Your body's trying to recover from severe energy depletion. Food helps." Selene realized she was starving. The tray held simple fare: bread, cheese, dried fruit, meat that looked freshly cooked. Her stomach growled audibly. Maven's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I prepared it myself, in the royal kitchens with guards posted at every entrance. Nobody else touched it." The implication being that even basic sustenance now required paranoid security measures. Selene ate mechanically, too hungry to care about dignity. The food tasted good, but she barely registered flavors beyond salt and protein. Maven watched her carefully. "The Citadel is talking. The soldiers who witnessed what you did are trying to stay quiet under orders, but whispers spread anyway. By tomorrow, every noble house will know something happened. By next week, they'll have theories. By next month, they'll have demands." "Let them demand," Draven said flatly. "They'll get nothing." "With respect, Your Majesty, silence only increases speculation." Maven's tone remained carefully deferential. Perhaps a controlled release of information would be preferable to letting rumors spiral. What kind of information? Selene asked around a mouthful of bread. That you're under royal protection due to unspecified threats, that an investigation is ongoing, that anyone attempting unauthorized contact will be considered hostile. Maven glanced at Draven. It establishes boundaries without confirming abilities. It also paints a target, Draven countered. The target's already painted, Maven replied. At least this way we control the narrative around it. Draven considered this. After a long moment, he nodded once. Draft something, run it by me before distribution. Maven bowed and withdrew, leaving them alone again. Selene finished eating in silence while Draven returned to his position by the window. The quiet felt heavy with unspoken implications. Finally, Selene spoke. What happens when they find out what I really am? War, Draven said simply. Open conflict between every house that thinks they can claim you. Alliances will shatter, treaties will collapse, the empire will tear itself apart. Then maybe I should… Don't. The single word cut like steel. Don't suggest running. Don't suggest surrender. Don't suggest any solution that involves sacrificing yourself to avoid conflict. Why not? If my existence causes war, wouldn't removing me prevent it? Draven turned from the window and his expression held something that might have been anger or might have been desperation. Because they'd hunt you to the ends of the earth. Because you'd spend whatever remained of your life running from one territory to another while they closed in. Because the best you could hope for would be capture and decades of slavery disguised as protection. And the worst? You'd disappear into some noble's private dungeon and spend years healing their soldiers while they raped empires into submission. The brutal honesty of it made Selene flinch. So my choices are stay here as your prisoner or become someone else's, she said bitterly. Your choice is staying here as my ally, Draven corrected, with training, resources, and protection that gives you a chance to survive long enough to become powerful enough that nobody can touch you without consequences. And what does that make me? Dangerous. He moved closer again. Dangerous enough that even kings think twice. That's the only safety left in this world. Not innocence, not helplessness. Just being so formidable that hurting you costs more than controlling you is worth. Selene wanted to argue. Wanted to reject the logic that turned survival into a calculation of acceptable violence. But she thought about the frozen sanctuary, about Cassiel's rejection, about dying alone because she believed the Empire's lies about her own worthlessness. Maybe Draven was right. Maybe the only way to survive was becoming the exact thing they feared. Teach me, she said quietly. Draven's expression shifted into something almost resembling approval. Already started. Over the following days, Nightgrave Citadel transformed into something between fortress and prison. Security increased until even the servants complained about checkpoints. Guards rotated constantly, never staying in one position long enough to be bribed or compromised. Maven controlled all food preparation personally, and Corwin inspected every healing salve and medicine before it reached Selene. The training intensified as well. Kaelor returned to the yards 3 days after Selene healed him, moving with the ease of someone who'd never been stabbed at all. He looked at her differently now, not with mockery or doubt, with the wary respect reserved for forces of nature that could either save you or destroy you depending on alignment. The combat drills grew more brutal, more realistic. Kaelor started teaching her how to fight dirty, eyes, throat, groin, where to stab for maximum blood loss, how to break joints with leverage instead of strength. Forget honor, he growled during one session while demonstrating a technique that involved using an opponent's momentum to drive their own blade through their ribcage. Honor is what wealthy nobles can afford because they have armies protecting them. You need survival. Selene learned fast because the alternative was bleeding out in sand while soldiers watched. But the physical training was only part of it. Draven started including her in strategic meetings with his inner circle. Generals and advisors who looked at her with varying degrees of suspicion, calculation, and barely concealed resentment. Lord Commander Kael, head of military operations, barely acknowledged her existence beyond clipped nods. Admiral Thress of the Coastal Fleet stared at her like she was a particularly interesting specimen he wanted to dissect. Lady Morrigan, the King's chief intelligence officer, watched with eyes that missed absolutely nothing. The meetings covered everything from troop movements to grain supplies to political marriages being negotiated 3 territories away. Selene stayed quiet initially, listening and learning the language of empire, how nobles spoke in implications and half-truths, how even alliances carried poisoned roots beneath diplomatic flowers. During one meeting about border disputes with the Eastern Territories, Lord Commander Kael proposed a military demonstration to remind them of Vareth's strength. Show force now, prevent war later, he argued. Or, Draven countered, provoke them into alliances with our enemies and create the exact war you're trying to prevent. They need to understand consequences. They understand consequences perfectly. Selene's voice cut through the argument before she realized she was speaking. What they don't understand is why we'd waste resources threatening them when negotiation costs nothing and leaves everyone stronger. The room went silent. Lord Commander Kael turned toward her with an expression that could have frozen steel. With respect, you know nothing about military strategy. I know, Selene replied evenly, that violence is what people resort to when they're too stupid or too scared to find better options. And I know that demonstrates weakness, not strength. Kael's jaw tightened. Your Majesty, perhaps including civilians in strategic planning was premature. Lady Selene makes a valid point, Draven interrupted. His tone remained neutral, but something in it made even Kael fall silent. Force should be final option, not first response. Admiral Thress, draft diplomatic overtures to the Eastern Territories. Emphasize mutual benefit. Make it clear that cooperation yields more than conflict. Thress nodded, but his gaze slid towards Selene with renewed interest. After the meeting, Draven stopped her in the corridor. That was dangerous, he said quietly. Disagreeing with your commanders? Making them see you as threat. He leaned against the stone wall, exhaustion visible in the shadows under his eyes. Kael's been serving this throne longer than I've been alive. He doesn't appreciate civilians questioning his expertise. Then maybe he should develop expertise worth respecting. Selene crossed her arms. Half the strategic proposals I've heard this week are just variations of hit things until they submit. That's not strategy. That's what children do when they're afraid. Draven studied her for a long moment. You realize you just called my Lord Commander a child. I called his tactics childish. There's a difference. Not to him. But Draven's expression held something that looked almost like amusement. You're learning faster than I expected. Learning what? How to offend dangerous people? How to see through the performance? He pushed off the wall. Everyone in that room plays a role. Kael plays the hardened warrior who trusts only steel. Thress plays the calculating strategist who weighs every option. Morgan plays the shadow who knows everyone's secrets. They've been performing so long they've forgotten where the role ends and reality begins. And what role do you play? The king who doesn't need anyone. Draven's voice dropped. Cold, ruthless, untouchable. Because the moment they think I need something, they'll use it against me. But you do need things. Yes. He met her gaze, which is why I can't afford to show it. The confession hung between them like a secret. Selene thought about the weight of that. Ruling an empire while pretending invulnerability, making every decision alone because trusting anyone meant creating weapons they could turn against you. That sounds exhausting, she said quietly. It is. Draven started walking, and Selene fell into step beside him. But it's also survival. The previous king, my father, trusted the wrong people. Let advisors convince him to policies that weakened the throne. By the time he realized the betrayal, they'd already poisoned him. I watched him die over 3 days while those same advisors smiled and expressed concern. How old were you? 19. His voice remained flat, but something underneath it felt raw. I executed 73 people within my first month as king, hanged them in the central square while the entire court watched. Some were guilty, some were probably innocent. I didn't care. I needed the empire to understand that questioning my rule ended in death. And it worked? For now. He glanced at her. But fear only lasts as long as your ability to inspire it, which is why I can never appear weak, never vulnerable, never anything except absolutely certain and absolutely dangerous. They reached her quarters. Guards stood at attention on either side of the door, eyes forward, weapons ready. Draven stopped. The meeting tomorrow covers economic policy. Nothing dramatic. But pay attention to who proposes what and who benefits. Follow the gold and you'll see the real alliances underneath the diplomatic ones. You want me learning politics now? I want you understanding how empires really operate. His gaze held hers, because eventually they're going to come for you again. And when they do, your best defense won't be healing or fighting. It'll be knowing exactly who to destroy first. The nightmares started that night. Selene dreamed of golden light pouring from her hands while soldiers lined up endlessly, each one wounded, each one dying, each one demanding she save them until she collapsed into ash, and they kept coming anyway. She woke gasping, sheets soaked with sweat, heart hammering against her ribs. A shadow moved in the corner of her room. Selene jerked upright, power instinctively rising beneath her skin in golden sparks. "Easy," Draven's voice came from the darkness. "Just me." Her power subsided slowly. "What are you doing here?" "Couldn't sleep." He remained in the shadows near the window. "Thought I'd check your security." "At 3 in the morning?" "Security doesn't sleep." Selene rubbed her face, trying to calm her racing pulse. "Do you ever actually rest? Or do you just wander the citadel all night making sure nobody's plotting murder?" "Both." He moved slightly and moonlight caught his profile. "Insomnia comes with the crown. So does paranoia. After a while you stop distinguishing between them. That's not sustainable." "Neither is ruling an empire." Draven's tone held dark humor. "But we do it anyway." Selene pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. The nightmare clung to her thoughts like cobwebs she couldn't quite brush away. "You ever wonder," she asked quietly, "if we're the villains in someone else's story?" "Every day." The honesty of it surprised her. "And?" she pressed. "And I've decided I don't care." Draven turned from the window. Every ruler becomes a villain to someone. The question is whether you're the villain who holds the empire together, or the villain who lets it collapse into chaos while maintaining moral purity. Those aren't the only options, aren't they? He moved closer, and she could finally make out his expression in the dim light. Tired, scarred, old in ways that had nothing to do with years. "Name me a single ruler who kept everyone safe while staying innocent. One king or queen who didn't make choices that destroyed some people to save others." Selene couldn't. "Exactly," Draven said. "So I choose the version of evil that keeps the most people breathing. I execute traitors so thousands don't die in civil wars. I make alliances with corrupt nobles so supply lines stay open and farmers don't starve. I become the monster everyone fears because the alternative is becoming the weakness everyone exploits." "And you never question it?" "I question it constantly." He sat on the edge of her bed uninvited, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. "Every execution, every sacrifice, every choice that costs lives to prevent bigger tragedies. I question all of it, but questioning doesn't change the reality of what's necessary." Selene studied his profile in the moonlight. "You're more tired than you pretend. Everyone in power is tired." His voice softened slightly. "The difference is whether you admit it." They sat in silence for a while. The citadel beyond the windows remained dark and quiet, but Selene could feel the weight of it. Thousands of souls sleeping or waking or plotting behind stone walls, all of them connected to the decisions made in rooms like this by people like them. "The nightmares will get worse," Draven said eventually. "Using luminary power like that, healing dying men, it connects you to death in ways normal people never experience. You feel them dying, feel yourself pulling them back. Eventually the line between their pain and yours blurs completely." "You sound like you know from experience." "My father had a seer at court, woman who could predict battles and catastrophes. She went mad after 15 years of watching futures where everyone died." He glanced at Selene. "Power always costs something. The question is whether you can pay the price without losing yourself completely. And if I can't, then I'll make sure you take the empire down with you instead of going quietly." His tone remained matter of fact. "At least that way your destruction means something." The brutal pragmatism of it should have been horrifying. Instead, Selene found it almost comforting. Because at least Draven understood. At least he didn't pretend kindness when survival required cruelty. At least he was honest about the cost of power instead of dressing it in pretty lies about duty and honor. "You should rest," Draven said, standing. Tomorrow's meeting starts early. Will you? Eventually, he moved toward the door, then paused. The guards outside are soldiers I trust with my life. They won't let anyone harm you. And who protects you while you're protecting me? Draven's expression shifted into something that might have been surprise, like nobody had asked him that question in years. I protect myself, he said finally. Then he was gone, door closing softly behind him. Selene lay back against the pillows, staring at the constellation ceiling, and wondered what it meant that the most dangerous man in the Empire spent sleepless nights checking on her security personally. Wondered if he was protecting an asset, or if something more complicated was happening. The summons came 3 weeks later. Lord Malrek Kaelor requested an audience with the king regarding matters of succession and territorial security, Draven's uncle. The man who'd ruled as regent before Draven came of age, the man who'd never forgiven being displaced from power. The meeting took place in the formal audience chamber, a space even larger and more intimidating than the throne room. Marble columns carved with battle scenes rose toward vaulted ceilings. Banners representing every major house in the Empire hung from iron fixtures. Draven sat the obsidian throne in full regalia, crown of black steel and rubies, robes that probably cost more than entire villages, the performance of absolute authority. Selene stood to his right, slightly behind, a position that marked her as important but not equal, protected but not sovereign. Lord Malrek entered with an entourage that seemed designed to intimidate. 20 armed guards, 5 advisors wearing noble crests, a show of force wrapped in diplomatic courtesies. Malrek himself moved like a man who'd spent decades commanding soldiers, tall, broad, gray-streaked hair pulled back military style. He knelt before the throne with the bare minimum of deference required by protocol. "Your Majesty," he said, "thank you for granting this audience." "Uncle," Draven's voice carried no warmth. "State your business." Malrek rose. His gaze flicked briefly toward Selene, and she saw calculation in those eyes. Cold assessment of value and threat. "I've received concerning reports," Malrek began, "regarding security breaches within Nightgrave, assassination attempts against your person, attacks on Royal Guard facilities. I come offering support and resources to strengthen defenses." "How generous," Draven replied flatly. "What do you want in return?" "Direct conversation for once." Malrek's jaw tightened. "You've isolated yourself behind walls and paranoia, nephew. You refuse counsel. You make decisions without consulting the noble houses who helped build this empire. And now rumors suggest you're harboring someone of significant strategic value without informing your own bloodline. My decisions are mine to make, not when they affect imperial stability." Malrek gestured towards Selene. "This woman, Selene Vale, disgraced Omega from a minor house. Why is she standing beside the throne while legitimate advisors wait in antechambers?" The challenge hung in the air like drawn steel. Draven's expression remained unchanged. "Lady Selene is under royal protection due to threats against her life. The nature of those threats remains under investigation." "Interesting," Malrek's tone dripped skepticism. "And these threats have nothing to do with unverified reports of miraculous healing during the barracks attack?" Silence crashed through the chamber. Selene's pulse kicked into overdrive. He knew. Somehow Malrek knew about the luminary power, which meant he'd planted spies deep enough inside Nightgrave to gather intelligence even under lockdown. Draven stood slowly. The movement carried such controlled menace that even Malrek's guards tensed. "Choose your next words carefully," Draven said quietly, "because they'll determine whether you leave this chamber whole or in pieces." "I'm not your enemy, nephew." But Malrek didn't back down. "I want what's best for the Empire. If this woman possesses abilities that could shift the balance of power, then controlling her becomes a matter of national security, not personal preference. She's not property to be controlled. Everything in this empire is controlled." Malrek's voice hardened. "That's how civilization functions. Order, hierarchy, power allocated properly instead of hoarded by kings who confuse isolation with strength. And you believe you should control her instead?" "I believe," Malrek said, "that someone with clearer judgment and less emotional compromise should make decisions about strategic assets. You're 25 years old, Draven. Brilliant and ruthless, yes, but also prone to attachments that could be exploited." The word attachments felt like acid. Draven descended the throne steps with predatory grace. You're suggesting I'm compromised. I'm suggesting caution. Malrek held his ground. History is filled with kings who fell because they prioritized one person over the empire's needs. I won't watch you become another cautionary tale. Then watch this instead. Draven moved faster than thought, grabbing Malrek by the throat and slamming him against the nearest pillar hard enough that marble cracked. Guards on both sides drew weapons. Everyone stands down, Draven commanded without releasing his uncle's throat. Or I crush his windpipe, and we see how imperial succession handles regicide. Nobody moved. Malrek choked but maintained eye contact, fury and calculation burning in equal measure. You want to talk about control? Draven's voice dropped to something deadly. About strategic assets? Fine. But understand this. Selene Vale answers to no one except me. Not you. Not any noble house. Not any general who thinks military rank entitles them to ownership of a woman who's done nothing except survive situations that would have destroyed most of your soldiers. He released Malrek, who collapsed coughing. She stays under my protection, Draven continued. She trains with my forces. She occupies the royal wing because that's where I can guarantee her safety. And if you or anyone else makes another attempt, veiled or direct, to take her, I will consider it an act of war against the throne itself. Malrek straightened slowly, rubbing his throat. You're making a mistake. Then it's mine to make. Draven turned back toward the throne. This audience is over. Leave, now. Malrek's entourage began withdrawing, but his gaze locked onto Selene one final time. And in that look, she saw the future clearly. This wasn't over. This was a declaration of intent. When the chamber finally emptied except for royal guards, Draven's shoulders dropped fractionally. That was foolish, he said without turning. Emotional response to calculated provocation. You protected me, Selene replied. I showed weakness. He turned and his expression looked haunted. I confirmed exactly what Malrek suspected, that you matter, that controlling you means controlling me. Then send me away. No. The single word carried absolute finality. I meant what I said. Anyone who wants you goes through me first. Even if it means war? Draven met her gaze steadily, especially then. And Selene realized with terrible clarity that they'd crossed a line neither of them could walk back from. Because Malrek wouldn't stop now. He'd gather forces, build alliances, wait for the perfect moment, and then he'd come for her with everything he had, which meant eventually Draven would have to choose, the Empire or her, and she had no idea which one would win. The weeks following Malrek's confrontation felt like waiting for a blade to fall. Selene trained harder, fought longer, pushed her body past exhaustion because staying still meant thinking about the war she'd accidentally started just by existing. Draven increased security to suffocating levels. Guards rotated every 4 hours. Food came from locked kitchens with Maven personally overseeing preparation. Even the air in Nightgrave felt heavy with paranoia and waiting violence. The Empire watched. Nobles sent carefully worded letters requesting audiences. Military houses offered alliances contingent on access to royal council. Foreign territories floated diplomatic inquiries that barely disguised threats. Everyone wanted to know about the woman standing beside the king. Everyone wanted to understand what made her valuable enough to risk civil war. And Draven stonewalled them all with the kind of absolute refusal that made enemies out of former allies. He was choosing her over political stability, and everyone knew it. The question wasn't whether there would be consequences anymore. The question was when they'd arrive and how brutal they'd be. Selene felt the pressure building like a storm, gathering strength. She saw it in the way servants avoided eye contact, in how even loyal guards shifted nervously when she passed, in the silence that fell whenever she entered rooms where nobles congregated. She'd become a symbol of something dangerous, proof that the established order could be disrupted by someone who wasn't supposed to matter, and symbols either got worshipped or destroyed. There was no middle ground. One evening, after particularly brutal training that left her bleeding from a dozen minor cuts, Selene found Draven waiting in her quarters. He stood at the window overlooking the citadel grounds where torches burned like angry stars against gathering darkness. He didn't turn when she entered. "You should leave," he said quietly. Selene froze halfway through removing her training leathers. What? Leave Nightgrave, tonight. I'll provide transport, guards, resources. Enough to disappear somewhere the Empire can't easily reach. You said, I know what I said. Draven finally turned and exhaustion lined every angle of his face. I said anyone who wanted you went through me. I meant it. But I'm watching this empire tear itself apart because I won't give you up, and I'm starting to wonder if my pride is worth the cost. Selene's chest tightened. This isn't pride, isn't it? He moved closer. 3 noble houses have withdrawn support in the last week. The southern reaches are making alliances with territories that want me dead. Even my own generals are questioning whether protecting one woman justifies destabilizing everything we've built. So you're giving up? I'm being realistic. But his voice cracked slightly. I can hold Nightgrave, can probably hold the throne through sheer force. But eventually the pressure breaks something, and when it does, the casualties won't be just political. Thousands will die in the conflicts that follow. And you think my absence stops that? I think, Draven said carefully, that removing the catalyst might prevent the explosion. Selene stared at him, really looked at him, saw the king who never showed weakness finally buckling under weight he couldn't carry alone, saw the man beneath the crown who'd spent years making impossible choices and was finally questioning whether he'd chosen wrong this time. No, she said. Selene, no. She moved closer until they stood inches apart. You don't get to save me by letting me run. You don't get to protect me by throwing me back into a world that already tried to kill me once. And you sure as hell don't get to make this decision without asking what I want. What you want doesn't matter if you're dead. Then I'll die here. The words came out fierce. Fighting beside you instead of running alone. Because at least that means something. Draven's expression cracked. For just a moment, the mask fell completely, and she saw raw desperation underneath. I can't lose this, he whispered. Can't lose you and the throne and everything I've sacrificed for. The cost is too high. Then stop trying to choose. Selene reached up, gripping his face between her hands. Stop calculating which loss you can survive and start fighting for what you actually want. And if what I want destroys everything, then we rebuild from ashes. She held his gaze. Together. Something shifted in the air between them. Something that felt like a decision being made or a line being crossed, or both simultaneously. Draven kissed her, hard and desperate, and nothing like the careful control he showed the rest of the world. Like a man drowning, and she was the only oxygen left. Selene kissed him back with equal ferocity, with weeks of tension and fear and understanding that they were both broken people trying to survive an empire designed to destroy anyone who didn't fit perfectly into its cruel hierarchies. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Draven pressed his forehead against hers. This is a mistake, he said. Probably. It makes everything more complicated. Definitely. And it gives our enemies exactly the weakness they've been looking for. Yes. Selene's hand slid to his shoulders. But I'm done pretending survival means staying empty. Done believing strength requires loneliness. If we're going down, at least we go down as something real instead of just symbols. Draven pulled back enough to meet her eyes. You understand what this means? What they'll do with it? They'll call me whore and political pawn and ambitious Omega who seduced her way to power. Selene smiled without humor. They already call me worse. At least this way it's true. It's not like that. I know. She cut him off gently. But they won't care about truth. They'll twist it until it fits their narrative, until you're the compromised king and I'm the manipulator who destroyed you. Let them try. Draven's voice turned cold again. Hard. Let them come with whatever poison they've been preparing. We'll burn it down together. He kissed her again, slower this time, but no less intense. And Selene felt something dangerous bloom in her chest. Not just attraction or survival instinct or strategic alliance. Something that felt terrifyingly like hope. Like maybe 2 broken people could build something stronger than either of them alone. Like maybe the Empire's cruelty had accidentally created exactly the force capable of tearing its corrupted systems apart. They spent the night tangled together, learning the geography of each other's scars. Every mark told a story. Every wound represented survival. And somewhere between darkness and dawn, Selene understood something fundamental about power. It wasn't about dominance or control or fear. It was about finding someone strong enough to survive beside you when everything else collapsed. Morning came with Maven's knock and news that shattered everything. Selene woke alone. Draven had left before dawn, probably returning to his own quarters to maintain appearances. The sheets still smelled like him, smoke and pine, and something darker that made her chest ache. She was halfway through dressing when Maven entered looking pale and terrified in ways Selene had never seen before. "What happened?" Selene asked immediately. "Lord Cassiel Arden has arrived at Nightgrave." Maven's voice shook slightly. "Requesting immediate audience with His Majesty regarding urgent matters of territorial security and personal claim." The name hit like a physical blow. Cassiel, her former mate. The male who'd rejected her publicly and set this entire nightmare in motion. "Why is he here?" Selene's hands clenched into fists. "Unknown." Maven moved closer, lowering her voice. "But he brought a military escort, 50 armed soldiers wearing Arden colors. The king has granted audience in 1 hour. You're summoned to attend." "Like hell." "It's not optional." Maven's expression hardened. "His Majesty wants you there. Says if Cassiel came for you, better to face it directly than let him spread poison through back channels." Selene wanted to argue, wanted to refuse, wanted to be anywhere except in the same room with the male who'd destroyed her so casually. But Draven was right. Running from this just gave Cassiel power. So she let Maven help her into formal attire. A gown of midnight blue that probably cost more than her entire former dowry. Hair pulled back severe, cosmetics applied with strategic precision to emphasize strength rather than beauty. She looked like someone who belonged beside a throne, felt like someone barely holding together. When she entered the audience chamber, Draven already occupied his throne. He wore full regalia again, crown, robes, the performance of absolute authority. His expression revealed nothing, but his eyes found hers immediately, and she saw recognition there, saw last night reflected in his gaze. Then Cassiel entered, and every other thought vanished. He looked exactly as she remembered. Golden hair, sharp features, military bearing that commanded attention without effort, beautiful in the way predators were beautiful, all grace and hidden violence. He knelt before the throne with perfect courtly precision. "Your Majesty," Cassiel said smoothly, "thank you for granting this audience on such short notice." "Lord Arden," Draven's tone remained neutral. "State your business." Cassiel rose, and his gaze swept the chamber before landing on Selene standing beside the throne. His expression shifted into something that looked like surprise mixed with calculation. "I see the rumors are true," Cassiel said. "Selene Vale, alive and apparently thriving under royal protection." "Lady Selene is under my protection due to threats against her life," Draven replied flatly, "which you have no authority or reason to question." "Actually, Your Majesty, I have both." Cassiel pulled a document from his formal robes, sealed with multiple noble crests. "This is a territorial claim filed with the High Council of Houses. As Selene's bonded mate," "Former mate," Selene interrupted, voice sharp. "You rejected the bond publicly, stripped me of standing and had me exiled. You have no claim." "The rejection was political necessity," Cassiel replied smoothly. "Not a true severing of bond. The connection remains, which gives House Arden legal standing regarding your welfare and current status." Rage flooded Selene's veins. "Legal standing? You left me to die." "I left you to grow stronger, away from pressures you weren't ready to handle." Cassiel's tone turned almost gentle, almost sincere. "I knew you had potential, Selene. Knew that rejection would either destroy you or forge you into something remarkable. I'm pleased to see the latter occurred." The gaslighting was so smooth, so perfectly delivered, that for a moment Selene almost doubted her own memories. Then she remembered freezing in that sanctuary, remembered dying alone because he'd convinced everyone she was worthless. "You're lying," she said flatly. "I'm being honest for the first time." Cassiel stepped closer to the throne. "Your Majesty, I've come to formally request Lady Selene's return to House Arden custody. As her rightful mate and with legal precedent supporting territorial claims over bonded individuals, I have standing to remove her from what has become an increasingly dangerous political situation." "She's not property," Draven said quietly, dangerously. "She's omega bonded to an alpha of established military lineage." Cassiel held up the document. According to imperial law codified across 5 centuries, that bond supersedes even royal protection in matters of custody, unless you're suggesting the crown no longer recognizes traditional territorial rights. The trap snapped closed with brutal efficiency. If Draven refused, he'd be setting precedent that royal authority could override bonded claims. Every noble house in the empire would revolt. Civil war would be inevitable. If he agreed, Selene returned to Cassiel's control, to the male who'd already destroyed her once and clearly intended to use her luminary abilities for House Arden's benefit. Silence stretched through the chamber like drawn wire. Selene felt her world collapsing again. Felt the same helplessness from the rejection ceremony flooding back. Felt like prey caught between predators arguing over who got to consume her. Then Draven stood. The movement carried such controlled menace that even Cassiel stepped back involuntarily. Imperial law, Draven said quietly, also states that bonded claims can be challenged through formal combat. Single combat between the existing mate and any challenger who disputes custody. Cassiel's expression flickered. Your Majesty, surely... I challenge your claim. Draven descended the throne steps. Single combat. Here. Now. Winner takes custody. Loser withdraws all legal standing permanently. The chamber erupted. Cassiel's escort shouted protests. Royal guards moved to defensive positions. Nobles who'd been watching from the gallery began arguing loudly. Selene felt frozen. Because she understood what Draven was doing, he was risking everything, throne, stability, life itself, on a single fight. On the chance that he could defeat Cassiel in combat and break the legal trap. It was insane. It was also the most honest thing anyone had done for her since this nightmare began. Your Majesty, Cassiel said carefully, you're the sovereign. Such challenges are beneath. I'm also an alpha, Draven interrupted, and I'm invoking ancient right of challenge, unless you're refusing, in which case your claim is forfeit by cowardice. Cassiel's jaw tightened. He couldn't refuse without losing face in front of every noble watching, couldn't back down without admitting his legal claim was just political maneuvering. Very well, Cassiel said finally. I accept your challenge. Guards cleared the center of the chamber. Weapons were brought, matched blades, traditional for formal duels. Maven appeared beside Selene, face pale. This is madness. Cassiel trained with the finest military instructors in the Empire. He's killed men in actual combat. So has Draven, Selene whispered, but fear tasted like copper on her tongue. Because this wasn't strategic, wasn't calculated. This was Draven letting emotion override reason, letting attachment compromise judgment exactly the way everyone feared it would. And she'd caused it. The duel began with ceremonial formality, both fighters saluting, circling, testing distance. Then steel met steel, and formality vanished. Cassiel fought with textbook precision, every strike calculated for maximum efficiency, every defense perfectly positioned. The kind of technical mastery that came from years of disciplined training. Draven fought like violence given purpose. Brutal, direct, no wasted motion but nothing gentle either. Like he was trying to carve his claim into Cassiel's flesh through sheer force. They crashed together repeatedly, blades singing, neither giving ground. The audience watched in breathless silence. Selene's nails dug into her palms hard enough to draw blood, because she could see what was happening. Cassiel was better, technically. Smoother, more controlled. But Draven fought with something Cassiel lacked, absolute conviction. 10 minutes in, Draven drew first blood, a slash across Cassiel's shoulder that painted his golden armor red. 20 minutes in, Cassiel returned the favor with a cut along Draven's ribs that made him stagger. Both kept fighting. Exhaustion began showing. Movement slowing fractionally. Guards dropping microseconds too late. Then Cassiel made his mistake. He lunged for a killing strike aimed at Draven's throat, overextending slightly, and Draven caught the blade on his own, twisted with vicious precision, and drove his sword through Cassiel's dominant shoulder. Cassiel screamed, dropped his weapon, collapsed to his knees. Draven stood over him, blade at Cassiel's throat, chest heaving, blood running down his side. Yield, Draven commanded. Cassiel's face twisted with rage and pain. I yield. Loudly, so everyone hears. I yield the claim, Cassiel shouted. House Arden withdraws all legal standing regarding Selene Vale. Draven removed the blade, turned toward the assembled nobles. Witness it, he said, voice carrying despite exhaustion. Selene Vale belongs to no house except the crown, no territory, no mate. Anyone disputing this faces me personally. He looked directly at Selene then, and despite the blood, despite the pain visible in every movement, his expression held triumph. He'd won. For her. Selene felt something crack open in her chest, something that felt like the opposite of the bond breaking, like something fundamental clicking into place. Then Cassiel moved, fast, desperate, pulling a hidden blade from his boot and lunging upward at Draven's exposed back. Time fractured. Selene screamed a warning. Draven started turning. Too slow. The blade would have pierced his spine except golden light erupted from Selene's hands without thought or control. A blast of pure radiance that caught Cassiel mid-strike and hurled him backward with bone-breaking force into the marble floor. He didn't get up. The chamber fell silent. Every eye turned toward Selene standing with hands still glowing, power crackling around her like visible fury. And in that moment, the secret became impossible to hide. Because everyone had just witnessed luminary power manifest in raw, undeniable, terrifying glory. Draven moved to her immediately, gripping her shoulders. Look at me. Focus. Selene's vision swam. The power kept pouring out, unstoppable, consuming her from inside. I can't. It won't stop. Yes, it will. Draven's voice cut through the chaos. You control it. Not the reverse. Pull it back. I don't know how. Yes, you do. His grip tightened. The same way you healed Kaelor, the same way you've survived everything else, you decide. Selene focused on his voice, on the anchor of his certainty. Imagined the power as something she could hold instead of something holding her. Slowly, agonizingly. The golden light faded, retreated back into her skin until nothing remained except exhaustion and the aftershocks of using abilities she barely understood. She sagged against Draven, who caught her easily despite his own injuries. The chamber remained frozen. Then Lord Commander Kael stepped forward, face unreadable. Your Majesty, he said carefully, the rumors were true. She's a sovereign luminary. Yes, Draven replied flatly. Then protocol demands... Protocol demands nothing. Draven's voice turned to ice. She stays under my protection. Non-negotiable. With respect, another noble called from the gallery, a power that's significant cannot remain solely under crown control. The High Council must... The High Council can burn. Draven cut him off. I've just won formal combat for custody. That's binding under the same ancient law you all love citing when it benefits you. She's mine. End of discussion. Murmurs erupted, protests building toward open rebellion. Then Maven appeared at Draven's side, face grave. Your Majesty, she said quietly, you're bleeding badly. You need the physician immediately. Draven glanced down at his side where blood soaked through his robes. The wound from Cassiel's blade looked worse than Selene initially thought. After I secure, now, Maven insisted, or you'll collapse in front of everyone and undermine everything you just won. She was right. Showing weakness now would invite challenges Draven couldn't afford. He looked at Selene. Can you walk? Barely. Good enough. He transferred her weight to Maven. Take her to my private chambers, post triple guard. Nobody gets in or out without my explicit permission. And you? Selene asked. I'm going to let Corwin patch me up, while making it very clear to every noble in the Citadel that their options are accept this or face execution. His expression hardened. Then I'm going to find out how Cassiel knew to come here with legal documentation and perfect timing, because someone told him about you. The implication settled like poison. Someone inside Nightgrave had betrayed them. Someone close enough to know details that should have been locked secrets. Maven led Selene out while Draven barked orders at his commanders. The corridors felt longer than usual, darker, like the Citadel itself had turned hostile. They reached Draven's private chambers, larger than her quarters but surprisingly sparse. Functional, a place for sleeping and strategic planning, not comfort. Maven settled her onto a chair near the fireplace. Stay here. Don't open the door for anyone except the king or me. Maven, I need to check something. Maven's expression looked troubled. Just stay here. She left before Selene could protest further. Alone in Draven's chambers, Selene felt the day's events crash over her like waves. Cassiel's arrival, the legal trap, the duel, her power exploding publicly. And underneath it all, the sick certainty that someone had orchestrated everything perfectly. She didn't know how long she sat there. Minutes, hours. Time felt meaningless. Finally, the door opened. Draven entered looking exhausted and bandaged. He moved carefully, favoring his injured side. How bad? Selene asked. Survivable. He crossed to a cabinet, poured 2 glasses of something amber, handed her one. Drink. It helps. The liquor burned going down. Good burn. Grounding. They sat in silence for a while. I found the traitor, Draven said finally. Selene's stomach dropped. Who? General Kaelor. The name hit like a physical blow. Kaelor. The man she'd saved. The man who'd trained her. The man who seemed loyal beyond question. That's impossible, Selene whispered. I wish it were. Draven drained his glass. He was feeding information to Malrek about your abilities, about our security measures, about everything. Why? Because he believes Malrek is right. Draven's voice turned bitter. Believes I'm compromised by attachment. Believes a luminary should be controlled by military council, not protected by a king who's lost objectivity. What are you going to do? Draven looked at her. Really looked at her. And Selene saw the answer in his eyes before he spoke. I'm going to execute him publicly tomorrow at dawn, Draven said quietly, along with everyone else who helped him. I'm going to make it brutal enough that betrayal becomes unthinkable. He saved my life during training, and you saved his in the barracks. Draven's expression remained cold, which makes his betrayal worse, not better. He knew what you were, knew what you sacrificed, and he sold you anyway because his politics mattered more than your humanity. This is because of me. This is because of him. Draven moved closer. He made his choice. Now he lives with consequences. That's how power works. Selene felt tears burning behind her eyes. I'm destroying everything you've built. No. Draven cupped her face gently. You're exposing rot that was always there. I've spent years building loyalty through fear, through calculated brutality, through the performance of invincibility. And now I'm learning that real loyalty, the kind that survives actual testing, is rarer than I thought. What if there's no one left? Then we start over. His thumb brushed her cheek. Build something different, something that doesn't require everyone pretending they don't have weaknesses. That's naive. Probably. Draven smiled without humor. But I'm tired of ruling through terror alone. Tired of measuring every relationship by strategic value. Tired of being the monster everyone fears but nobody actually trusts. You're not a monster. I've done monstrous things. He pulled back slightly. 73 executions when I took the throne. Villages burned to stop rebellions. Families destroyed for political advantage. I've made every cruel choice necessary to hold power. And tomorrow you'll execute Kaelor. Yes, no hesitation. Because he betrayed not just me, but you. And that's unforgivable. The conviction in his voice should have been comforting. Instead, Selene felt something shift, something that made her question everything, because Draven was willing to execute a loyal general for her, was willing to risk civil war, was willing to watch his empire fracture, all because he decided she mattered more. And that kind of obsession, that kind of singular focus, was exactly what Malrek and everyone else feared. Maybe they were right to fear it. Stay with me tonight, Draven said quietly. I don't want to be alone. Selene nodded because she didn't want to be alone either. They lay together in his massive bed, not for passion, but for the comfort of another body, another heartbeat, proof that they weren't facing the darkness alone. But Selene couldn't sleep, because she kept thinking about choices and consequences and the price of survival, kept thinking about how she'd come to Nightgrave broken and discarded. And now she was the reason a king was watching his kingdom fall apart. Somewhere around midnight, while Draven slept fitfully beside her, Selene made a decision. She couldn't let this continue. Couldn't let Draven sacrifice everything for her, so she would remove herself from the equation, not by running, not by hiding, but by becoming something so powerful that no one could use her against him. Something so dangerous that protecting her became unnecessary because she could protect herself. She just had to figure out how to control abilities she barely understood, how to transform from the rescued victim into something genuinely terrifying. And she had until dawn to decide whether that transformation would save them or destroy what remained of her humanity in the process. Because the Empire had made its choice, and now she had to make hers. Dawn came with the sound of steel being sharpened. Selene woke to find Draven already dressed in full military regalia, black armor, crimson cape, the crown of obsidian and rubies that marked him as sovereign and executioner both. He stood at the window watching the execution platform being assembled in the courtyard below. She sat up slowly. Her body still ached from yesterday's power discharge. Every muscle felt bruised from the inside out. "You don't have to watch," Draven said without turning. "Yes, I do." Selene forced herself out of bed. "Kaelor betrayed us because of me. I should witness the consequences. He betrayed us because he chose politics over loyalty." Draven finally looked at her. "That's on him, not you." But they both knew the truth underneath those words. Kaelor had looked at the Empire fracturing around a king who'd become emotionally compromised and made a calculation. A brutal, pragmatic calculation that loyalty to the throne meant removing the source of compromise. And in another version of this story, he might have been the hero. The faithful general trying to save his king from weakness. In this version, he was the traitor who got caught. Maven arrived with formal clothes for Selene, dark gray that looked almost like mourning attire, appropriate for witnessing death. They descended through corridors already filling with nobles and soldiers summoned to witness royal justice. The atmosphere felt suffocating. Everyone knew what was coming. Everyone understood the message being sent. The courtyard was packed. Hundreds of bodies pressed together under gray morning sky. The execution platform stood at the center, raised wood and iron designed to ensure visibility. 7 nooses hung from the crossbeam. 7 traitors. Kaelor stood at the front, hands bound, face expressionless. The other 6 were lesser conspirators, guards who'd looked the other way, servants who'd passed information, one advisor who'd coordinated communications with Malrek. They all looked terrified except Kaelor. The general met Draven's gaze across the courtyard with something that looked almost like regret but not quite remorse. Because even now, even facing death, Kaelor believed he'd made the right choice. That was the cruelest thing about loyalty, Selene realized. Everyone believed their version was the correct one. Everyone thought their betrayal was actually salvation. Draven ascended the platform. The crowd fell silent immediately. "These men and women stand accused of treason," Draven announced, voice carrying across the courtyard with absolute authority. They passed classified intelligence to enemies of the crown. They facilitated attacks against royal personnel. They betrayed oaths sworn on blood and steel. He paused, letting the accusations settle. "General Kaelor," Draven continued, looking directly at the condemned man, "you trained beside me, fought beside me. I trusted you with my life and the lives of everyone in this citadel. Do you have final words before sentence is carried out?" Kaelor straightened despite his bonds. When he spoke, his voice remained steady. "I served the throne for 30 years. Served your father and grandfather before you. Everything I did was to protect the Empire from destruction." His gaze shifted to Selene standing beside the platform. "That woman is a weapon powerful enough to reshape nations. Keeping her under sole royal control concentrates too much power. Makes you vulnerable to manipulation. Makes the Empire vulnerable to catastrophic decisions driven by attachment instead of reason." "So you betrayed me to save me?" Draven's tone remained flat. "I betrayed one king to preserve the throne itself." Kaelor's expression hardened. "You're brilliant, Your Majesty, ruthless, strong, but you're also young enough to believe love and power can coexist without one destroying the other. History proves otherwise. Every time." The words hit like arrows, sharp and precisely aimed at the wound everyone already knew existed. Because Kaelor was articulating what half the Empire already whispered, that Draven had been compromised, that his protection of Selene stemmed from weakness disguised as strength, that eventually attachment would destroy everything. "You think I don't know that?" Draven descended the platform steps slowly, approached Kaelor until they stood face to face. You think I haven't spent every night since she arrived questioning whether protecting her justifies the cost? Whether my judgment remains clear, or if I'm being manipulated by something I can't even name properly? Then prove you're still the king we need, Kaelor said quietly. Execute me, but send her away after. Give the Empire breathing room. Show them you can make the hard choice when it matters. The courtyard held its breath. Every eye turned toward Draven, and Selene understood the trap closing again. Different bait, same steel jaws. If Draven executed Kaelor and kept her, he'd appear vindictive, cruel, unable to see past personal attachment. If he executed Kaelor and sent her away, he'd appear weak, easily manipulated by advisors even as he killed them. Either way, doubt spread. Either way, the throne weakened. That was the genius of the conspiracy. It didn't require Draven to fall, just required planting enough questions that his authority eroded from within. Draven stared at Kaelor for a long moment. Then he stepped back. "You're right," Draven said, voice carrying across the silent courtyard. "Love and power rarely coexist peacefully. Attachment makes rulers vulnerable. Every king who prioritized one person over the Empire's needs ended badly." Hope flickered in Kaelor's expression. "Which is why," Draven continued, "I'm not choosing love. I'm choosing survival. Mine and hers both. Because she's not my weakness. She's proof that the Empire's entire system is built on lies designed to keep power concentrated in bloodlines that inherited it instead of earned it." He turned toward the assembled crowd. "You all want her controlled because she threatens the story you tell yourselves. The story where alphas rule and omegas submit, where nobility matters and common blood doesn't, where power flows predictably through established channels instead of erupting from discarded people who refuse to stay dead." His voice grew harder. "But that story is crumbling, has been crumbling since I took this throne and refused to play by rules written by corpses. She's just the proof you can't ignore anymore." Draven returned to Kaelor. "So no," he said quietly, "I won't send her away to make you comfortable. I won't sacrifice her to preserve a system that would have let her freeze to death for being inconvenient. And I sure as hell won't pretend your betrayal was anything except cowardice wrapped in strategy." He drew his blade. "You had 30 seconds to convince me you deserved mercy," Draven said. "You spent it proving you don't understand what loyalty actually means." The sword flashed. Kaelor's head hit the platform before his body registered the cut. The crowd gasped, not because executions were rare, because Draven had done it personally, with his own blade, in defiance of every protocol suggesting kings remained above such direct violence. The other 6 conspirators were hanged efficiently by executioners, but Kaelor died by the king's hand. The message was unmistakable. Betray me and I'll kill you myself. As the bodies were removed and the crowd began dispersing in shaken silence, Maven appeared at Selene's side. "That was dangerous," Maven murmured. "Executing a popular general personally. It looks emotional, vengeful." "It was both," Selene replied, because she'd seen Draven's face during the killing, seen the fury and grief and absolute conviction mixing into something terrifying. He'd killed Kaelor, not despite caring about him, but because of it. Because betrayal from someone trusted cut deeper than enemy attacks. And Draven wanted everyone to understand that emotional investment made him more dangerous, not less. Later, back in his chambers while servants cleaned blood from his armor, Draven sat in silence. Exhaustion and something darker lined his face. Selene approached carefully. "Are you all right?" "No." He didn't look up. "Kaelor trained me when I was 15, taught me half of what I know about strategy and combat. He was one of 3 people in this citadel I actually trusted." "I'm sorry." "Don't be." Draven finally met her gaze. "He made his choice. I made mine. That's how this works." But his hands shook slightly, barely visible, but there. Because executing enemies was easy. Executing people you cared about required something different. Required shutting down the part of yourself that remembered their humanity and reducing them to threats that needed eliminating. Required becoming the monster everyone already believed you were. Selene crossed to him, kneeling so they were eye level. "You're not him, not the villain in this story." "Aren't I?" Draven's voice cracked. "I just killed a man who served my family for 3 decades. Killed him in front of hundreds because I needed to send a message about protecting you. How is that not villainy?" Because he would have kept betraying us. Would have kept feeding information to people who want me captured or dead. Because sometimes the choice isn't between good and evil, it's between bad and worse. And you think I chose correctly? I think, Selene said carefully, that you chose survival, which is the only choice that matters when everything's trying to kill you. Draven pulled her close suddenly, held her like she was the only solid thing in a world dissolving around them. They stayed like that for a long time. Then a knock shattered the moment. Lady Morrigan entered without waiting for permission. The intelligence chief looked grim. "Your Majesty," she said, "we have a situation." "What kind?" Draven released Selene reluctantly. "Lord Malrek has called for emergency session of the High Council. He's claiming the execution of General Kaelor without trial constitutes tyranny. He's demanding the Council intervene to protect the Empire from royal overreach." Silence crashed through the chamber, because the High Council was the only body with theoretical authority to check the throne, 9 lords representing the major territories. They rarely convened because doing so usually meant the Empire stood at civil war's edge. If Malrek got them assembled and convinced them Draven had become unfit, they could legally move to depose him. It would be bloody, would tear the Empire apart, but it would be legal. "When?" Draven asked. 3 days. At the Crimson Conclave Hall. All 9 lords have confirmed attendance. Morgan's expression remained neutral. "He's forcing the confrontation, bringing everything to a head before you can consolidate support. Can we prevent the session?" "Only by arresting all 9 lords for conspiracy." Morgan shook her head, which proves his point about tyranny. "So we attend and fight politically? Or we attend and fight literally?" Morgan glanced at Selene. "Because Malrek isn't just challenging your rule. He's demanding custody of the luminary under council supervision. He's calling her an existential threat to imperial stability that requires neutral oversight." "I'm not neutral," Selene said flatly, which is exactly his argument. Morgan's gaze remained steady. "That you've compromised the king's judgment. That keeping you under sole royal control concentrates power dangerously. That the Empire needs protection from the throne's emotional weakness." Draven stood slowly, moved to the window overlooking the citadel. "He's been building to this since I took the crown," Draven said quietly. "Every challenge, every alliance, every peace positioned perfectly, and now he thinks he has the leverage to end me." "Does he?" Selene asked. "Politically? Maybe." Draven turned back. "The High Council is split. 4 lords support me unconditionally. 3 lean toward Malrek. 2 are genuinely undecided. If Malrek convinces those 2 that I've become unfit, they have legal standing to remove me." "And then what? He becomes king?" "He becomes regent until a proper succession can be established." Draven's expression hardened. "Which means he rules everything, including you." The implications settled like poison. "So we have 3 days, Selene said. 3 days to convince the council I'm still fit to rule despite executing a popular general to protect an Omega most of them consider politically radioactive." Draven laughed bitterly. "Should be simple." Morgan cleared her throat. "There is one option we haven't discussed." "What?" "Lady Selene demonstrates her abilities publicly, shows the council exactly what she is, and why controlling her matters more than political comfort." "Absolutely not," Draven snapped. "That makes her a target." "I'm already a target," Selene interrupted. "Everyone knows what I am after yesterday. Hiding it now just makes me look like your secret weapon. But if I show them, if I prove I'm not dangerous unless threatened, that changes the narrative. Or it confirms their worst fears." Draven crossed to her. "The moment they see what you can really do, every territorial lord in that chamber starts calculating how to acquire you." "Then let them try." Selene met his gaze steadily. "Let them see that I'm not property to be passed around. That I can defend myself. That protecting me isn't weakness, it's pragmatism because the alternative is turning me into an enemy." Morgan nodded slowly. "A demonstration of controlled power could work. Show healing to establish value. Show combat capability to establish autonomy. Make them understand she's an ally choosing to support the crown, not a prisoner being hoarded." Draven stared at Selene for a long moment. "You understand what you're suggesting?" he asked quietly. "Walking into a room full of predators and proving you're worth fighting over?" I'm suggesting, Selene replied, that I'm done being the thing you protect. Time to become the thing they fear. Something shifted in Draven's expression, something that looked like pride mixed with terror. 3 days, he said finally. We prepare for war, political and literal both. Because if Malrek forces this confrontation, he's coming with everything he has. Morgan bowed and withdrew. Alone again, Selene felt the weight of what she'd just committed to. 3 days to transform from victim to threat. 3 days to master abilities she barely understood. 3 days before everything exploded. Teach me, she said to Draven. Teach you what? How to fight like you. How to stand in front of power and refuse to break. How to become the thing that makes men like Malrek think twice. Draven studied her carefully. That's not teaching. That's transformation. And once you cross that line, you don't come back. Good. Selene's voice hardened. Because I don't want to come back. I want to go forward. Want to become something so dangerous that protecting me becomes unnecessary because I can burn down anyone stupid enough to try. You'll lose pieces of yourself, Draven warned. Become harder, colder. The world looks different when you accept that survival requires cruelty. Then show me. Selene moved closer. Show me how to survive when mercy gets you killed. Show me how to rule beside you instead of hiding behind you. Draven's expression cracked into something raw. You have no idea what you're asking. Yes, I do. She gripped his face between her hands. I'm asking you to help me become your equal, your partner, not your liability. For a moment, Draven looked like he might argue, might try to protect her from the transformation she was demanding. Then he kissed her hard, desperately, like a man watching something precious walk into fire and knowing he couldn't stop it. 3 days, he whispered against her mouth. We make you into something terrifying. The training began immediately and bore no resemblance to Vailor's combat drills. This was different, darker, focused not on technique but on mentality. Draven took her to the deepest levels of Nightgrave, to chambers where prisoners were kept, where interrogations happened, where the Empire's ugly work occurred away from marble and gold. You need to understand what you're becoming, Draven said as they descended into torchlit corridors that smelled like old blood and fear. Need to see what power actually requires. He showed her the dungeons, showed her men and women locked in cells for crimes ranging from treason to theft, showed her how the Empire sorted threats and eliminated them quietly. Every ruler makes these choices, Draven explained. Every throne stands on dungeons filled with people who threaten stability. The only question is whether you acknowledge it or pretend your hands stay clean. They watched an interrogation, not torture, just relentless questioning designed to break will through exhaustion and isolation. The prisoner, a spy from the southern reaches, lasted 6 hours before giving up information about troop movements and alliances. Power isn't dramatic, Draven said quietly as they watched. It's persistent. It's knowing exactly how much pressure to apply before something breaks. It's reading people well enough to find their limits and exploit them. Selene felt sick, but she forced herself to keep watching. Because Draven was right. This was reality. This was how empires functioned underneath the performance. Later, in a private training room, Draven taught her different lessons. Combat is easy, he said. Point weapon. Attack enemy. Basic instinct. But ruling, surviving at the top, that requires different skills entirely. He taught her to read micro-expressions, to spot lies before they fully formed, to recognize when someone's loyalty was genuine versus performed. Taught her to negotiate from positions of strength even when holding weak cards, to make threats that carried weight, to know when violence served better than diplomacy. The key, he explained, is making people believe you're more dangerous than you actually are. Reputation does half the work. Fear fills in the rest. He brought in Maven and Morrigan and Commander Kael, made Selene practice conversational combat with each of them, learning to parry verbal attacks, to redirect implications, to stand her ground when titled nobles tried talking down to her. Kael was brutal, attacked with the kind of casual contempt that assumed she'd crumble. Selene learned to meet it with ice, to refuse engagement with insults while maintaining position. You're learning, Draven observed after Kael finally backed down from an exchange about military strategy. Starting to understand that weakness isn't about ability, it's about showing doubt. At night, he taught her about the luminary power specifically.
You've been treating it like something that happens to you, Draven said. Like you're the victim of your own abilities. That's wrong. The power is yours. You control when it manifests and how. I don't know how. Because you're afraid of it. He gripped her hands, afraid of what it means, what it makes you. But fear gives it control. You need to claim it, own it, make it serve you instead of the reverse.
He made her practice small manifestations, healing minor cuts, generating light without exhausting herself, learning to regulate flow instead of unleashing everything at once. It was excruciating, like trying to redirect a river through sheer will. But gradually, she gained ground, started feeling the power as something she wielded rather than something wielding her. On the second night, Draven brought her back to the throne room, empty except for them. "Stand there," he indicated the throne. Selene climbed the dais slowly, sat on the obsidian seat that felt too large, too heavy with history and blood. "How does it feel?" Draven asked from below. "Uncomfortable. Wrong." "Why?" "Because I don't belong here." "Wrong answer." Draven ascended the steps, stood beside the throne looking down at her. "You don't belong here because of bloodline, but neither did I. Neither did half the rulers in history who actually mattered. Belonging is what you claim, not what you inherit." He knelt suddenly, put himself below her physically. "Say it," he commanded. "Say you belong here." Selene's throat tightened. "I can't, say it. Make yourself believe it. Because in 2 days you walk into that council chamber and either they believe you matter or they don't. And belief starts with you." Selene forced the words out. "I belong here." Louder. "I belong here." "Like you mean it." "I belong here." The words echoed through the empty throne room, bounced off stone and gold and centuries of power. And something shifted inside Selene, some barrier cracking open. Because maybe she did belong. Maybe survival and strength and refusing to stay dead counted for something. Maybe the Empire's hierarchies were bullshit designed to keep people compliant. Maybe she'd earned her place through fire instead of birth, and that made it more legitimate, not less. Draven stood, pulled her up from the throne, kissed her like she was already queen. "Tomorrow," he said, "we handle the hardest part." "What's that?" "Learning when to kill." The final day arrived cold and gray. Draven took Selene to the execution courtyard where Kaelor had died. The platform remained, blood still stained wood despite attempts at cleaning. "You need to understand something," Draven said. "At the council, Malrek will push until violence becomes inevitable. He'll back you into corners, force reactions, try to make you look unstable or dangerous or whatever narrative serves him, and eventually you'll have to choose between showing throat or showing teeth. I'm not killing anyone. You might have to." His voice remained flat. "If Malrek attacks you directly, if assassins appear during the session, if any of a dozen scenarios play out where your only options are kill or die, you need to be ready." "I'm a healer." "You're a luminary," Draven corrected. "That power doesn't just preserve, it destroys. Light bright enough burns. Heat concentrated enough incinerates. You felt it when you threw Cassiel across the chamber. That wasn't healing, that was violence." Selene's stomach churned. "I don't want... What you want stopped mattering when they made you valuable." Draven gripped her shoulders. "I need to know you'll survive. Need to know that if I fall, if everything collapses, you can stand alone and burn down anyone stupid enough to come for you, because that's the only way you make it out alive." "You're not going to fall..." Malrek has been planning this for years. Has resources, allies, and absolutely nothing to lose. There's a very real chance tomorrow ends with me dead and you captured unless you're willing to use every weapon available. The brutal honesty hit like cold water. Selene had been so focused on surviving beside Draven that she hadn't fully processed what came after if he didn't survive. Capture. Enslavement. Decades of forced healing while some lord used her to build armies. Or death if she proved too difficult to control. "Show me," she said quietly. Draven led her through exercises designed to weaponize healing power. How to focus light into concentrated beams instead of diffuse radiance. How to accelerate cellular growth until it became cancerous destruction.
how to turn preservation into its opposite. It felt wrong, twisted, like corruption of something pure, but Draven was relentless. You think the Empire will let you stay pure? That you'll survive on good intentions and moral high ground? Purity gets you killed. Pragmatism keeps you breathing. By midday, Selene could generate enough focused heat to melt steel, could produce light so intense it left afterimages burned into vision, could kill if necessary. The realization settled in her bones like lead. She'd crossed another line, become another version of herself that the girl freezing in that sanctuary wouldn't recognize. But that girl had been dying. This version might actually survive. That evening, as final preparations were made for the council session, Maven found Selene in her quarters. "I brought something," Maven said. She held out a garment. "For tomorrow." It was armor, feminine but functional, black leather and steel designed to move with the body while protecting vitals. Beautiful and deadly simultaneously. "Where did this come from?" Selene asked. "His Majesty commissioned it weeks ago. Said if you were going to stand beside him, you needed to look the part." Selene traced the metalwork, intricate designs of light and shadow intertwining, symbols that meant protection and power both. "Maven," she said quietly, "do you think we can win tomorrow?" Maven's expression remained carefully neutral. "I think you've already won by surviving this long. Everything else is just determining how history remembers it." That night, Selene and Draven lay together in his chambers, not sleeping, just existing in the darkness while tomorrow approached like a blade. "I'm afraid," Selene admitted quietly. "Good." Draven's arm tightened around her. "Fear means you're paying attention, means you understand the stakes." "What if I fail? What if I can't?" "You won't fail." He turned to face her. "You survived rejection and exile and freezing death. You survived assassination attempts and political machinations, and me being a paranoid bastard who tested you at every opportunity. You're not going to fall now." "How do you know?" "Because I've been watching you transform. Watched you go from someone who wanted to die to someone willing to burn the world down to survive. That's not weakness. That's evolution." Selene pressed closer. "Promise me something." "What?" "If tomorrow goes bad, if I have to choose between saving you or saving myself, promise you won't hate me for choosing survival." Draven pulled back enough to meet her eyes. "I'd hate you if you didn't. Everything I've taught you, everything we've built. It's about you standing alone when necessary, about you being strong enough that my death doesn't equal your destruction." "That's cold." "That's love," Draven corrected. "Real love. Not the fantasy version where people sacrifice themselves romantically. The kind that wants you surviving even if it means stepping over my corpse to do it." Tears burned behind Selene's eyes. "I don't want—" "I know." He kissed her forehead. "But if it comes to that, you choose you, always. That's the rule." They held each other through the darkness while the Citadel slept or plotted or prepared for war. And when dawn finally came, painting the sky shades of blood and gold, they rose and dressed for battle. Selene in the armor Maven brought, Draven in full royal regalia. Two people who'd found each other in ruins and built something dangerous from shared survival. The carriage ride to Crimson Conclave Hall felt eternal and instant simultaneously. Elite guards surrounded them. Morgan rode ahead to assess security. The streets were empty, citizens ordered to shelter during the council session. The hall itself loomed massive and ancient, built from red stone that looked like dried blood. Architecture designed to intimidate, to remind everyone entering that they stood on ground where empires were born and destroyed. Inside, the council chamber stretched impossibly vast, 9 thrones arranged in a semicircle facing a central dais. Each throne occupied by a territorial lord wearing full formal attire and expressions ranging from calculating to hostile. Lord Malrek sat at the chamber's apex, the position of precedence. Already claiming dominance, Draven and Selene entered together. The room fell silent. Every eye tracked their approach, measuring, judging, waiting to see which version of this confrontation would unfold. Draven ascended the central dais with Selene beside him, claiming equal standing, making the statement before any words were spoken. Malrek stood slowly. "Your Majesty, how gracious of you to attend." "Lord Malrek." Draven's tone remained neutral. You called this session, State Your Grievance. Grievances, Malrek corrected. Plural. Where to begin? The execution of General Kaelor without trial, the hoarding of strategic assets under sole royal control, the prioritization of personal attachment over imperial stability. Take your pick. All of which translate to you questioning my fitness to rule. Draven didn't blink. So let's skip the performance and get to the actual challenge. You want the throne. You want custody of Selene. You've wanted both since I turned 20 and refused to die conveniently. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Malrek's expression hardened. I want the Empire protected from compromised leadership. And yes, that includes removing a king who executes loyal generals for political convenience and risks civil war over an omega of questionable loyalty. Questionable loyalty? Selene stepped forward, voice carrying across the chamber. I've been attacked, betrayed, and hunted since arriving at Nightgrave. Every assault came from people questioning whether I deserved protection, whether I deserved to exist. So forgive me if I don't value the opinions of lords who see me as property instead of person. You see? Malrek gestured toward her. This is exactly the problem. An untitled Omega speaking to the High Council as if she holds standing. This is the corruption we're here to address. Then address it, Draven said coldly. Present your case. Convince the council I'm unfit. Let's end this. Malrek smiled. Gladly. He began laying out arguments with practiced precision. Evidence of Draven's emotional compromise. Testimony from nobles about declining stability. Economic projections showing territorial unrest. Military intelligence suggesting enemies were preparing to exploit perceived weakness. Every point landed with calculated force. And through it all, Selene felt the chamber shifting, felt the undecided lords leaning toward Malrek's position, felt the trap closing with inexorable pressure. Because everything Malrek said was technically true. The Empire was fracturing. Draven had made emotionally driven decisions. The situation was unstable. The only question was whether instability mattered more than legitimacy. When Malrek finished, silence stretched. Then one of the undecided lords spoke. Your Majesty, respond to these allegations. Draven stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. Lord Malrek is correct. I have made decisions based on factors beyond pure strategy. I have protected Selene despite political cost. I have executed traitors and refused compromises that might have bought temporary peace. He paused. But here's what he's not telling you. Every choice I made was to prevent worse outcomes. Every execution prevented larger bloodshed. Every refusal to compromise prevented precedents that would have undermined this throne permanently. Pretty words, Malrek interrupted. But the evidence shows an empire in transition, Draven cut him off. Moving away from systems that concentrate power in bloodlines towards something more resilient. And yes, that's uncomfortable. Yes, it creates instability. But the alternative is stagnation that ends in collapse. You're gambling with the Empire's future. I'm building a future that doesn't require discarding people for being born inconvenient, Draven's voice rose. You want to talk about compromise? About questionable decisions? Let's discuss how the current system would have let Selene freeze to death. How it treats Omegas as property, how it maintains order through inherited privilege instead of earned authority. Those compromises end now. The chamber erupted into argument, and Selene realized this was the moment, the point where everything either shattered or held. She stepped forward. Let golden light begin glowing beneath her skin, not threatening, just visible, just proof. Look at me, she commanded, voice cutting through chaos. Really look. You see a threat, a weapon, something that needs controlling. But what I actually am is proof your system is broken. Proof that the people you discard sometimes become the exact force capable of destroying you. The light grew brighter. So here's your choice, Selene continued. Support a king trying to build something different, or remove him and spend the rest of your lives wondering when I'll return the favor. The threat hung crystal clear. Malrek's face twisted with fury. You dare! I dare everything, Selene interrupted, because I have nothing to lose. You already took it. But him? She gestured to Draven. He's giving me something worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth burning this entire empire to defend. This is exactly the corruption. This is the future, Draven said. Either accept it or face the consequences. Malrek's hand went to his blade. Then I'll take those consequences. He lunged, steel flashed, and everything exploded into violence as guards on both sides drew weapons, and the Crimson Conclave dissolved into the civil war everyone had been fearing. The chamber exploded into chaos with the precision of a nightmare unfolding in real time. Malrek's blade sang through air aimed at Draven's throat, but Draven had been expecting violence from the moment they entered. His sword met the attack with a clash that sent sparks flying across ancient stone. The sound echoed through the hall like thunder announcing storm's arrival. Guards on both sides drew weapons immediately. Steel rang against steel. Shouts of attack and defense overlapped into a symphony of controlled brutality. The High Council lords scattered from their thrones, some fleeing toward exits while others drew their own blades and chose sides in real time. This was the moment empires feared most. The instant when political theater transformed into actual bloodshed. When words failed and violence became the only language anyone understood. Selene felt golden light erupting from her skin instinctively, raw power responding to threat without conscious direction. It blazed outward in waves that pushed back anyone too close, creating a circle of radiance around her while the battle raged. Draven and Malrek fought like men who'd been waiting years for this confrontation. Every strike carried decades of resentment. Every parry held accumulated grievances about thrones and legitimacy and who deserved power. Malrek fought with military precision, textbook technique honed through campaigns. He moved like someone who'd commanded armies and understood violence as strategy. Draven fought like someone with everything to lose, brutal and desperate and absolutely unwilling to fall. Not because of pride. Because Selene stood 10 feet away and her survival depended on his. The duel should have been matched, should have gone on for minutes with both fighters testing each other's limits. Instead, Draven pressed hard and fast, overwhelming offense that forced Malrek backwards step by step, trading defense for aggression because ending this quickly mattered more than safety. A blade flashed past Draven's guard, opening a cut along his shoulder. Blood soaked through royal robes immediately. He didn't slow, didn't even acknowledge the wound, just kept pushing. Selene watched with her heart hammering against ribs. Watched this man who'd saved her from frozen death now risking everything because she'd somehow become worth dying for. The realization burned worse than any physical injury, because this was her fault. Her existence had sparked this war. Her presence had compromised a king who might have ruled peacefully for decades otherwise. And watching Draven bleed for that choice felt like being ripped apart from inside. Around them, the broader battle raged. Royal guards clashed with Malrek's supporters. Lords who'd chosen sides fought with the savage desperation of nobles who understood losing meant losing everything. Bodies began falling, some moving, some not. Blood painted marble floors and spreading pools that reflected torchlight like dark mirrors. Commander Kael appeared suddenly at Selene's side, blade drawn and expression grim. For one terrible moment, she thought he'd come for her. Thought the conspiracy ran deeper than anyone suspected. Then he positioned himself defensively between her and approaching hostiles. Still loyal after all. Still protecting the throne despite his doubts. The battle-tested commander cut through 2 attackers with brutal efficiency while Selene stood in her circle of light, trying to decide what her role should be in this violence. She was a healer. Her power existed to preserve life, not destroy it. But she'd also spent 3 days learning how to weaponize that same ability. How to transform preservation into its opposite when survival demanded it. The philosophical debate felt suddenly absurd in the middle of actual combat where people were dying in real time. 3 of Malrek's soldiers broke through the defensive line surrounding her. They moved with coordinated precision, clearly trained for exactly this scenario. Capture the luminary, remove her from the battlefield, use her as leverage. Kael intercepted one. His blade found throat and the soldier dropped choking. The other 2 closed on Selene from opposite sides. Professional, efficient. Not trying to kill, just subdue. Selene felt the golden light responding to threat, felt power gathering beneath her skin like pressure building before explosion. She could burn them, could reduce them to ash with concentrated radiance, could demonstrate exactly why capturing a luminary was suicide disguised as tactics. Instead, she focused the power differently, pushed it outward in a concussive wave that sent both soldiers flying backward into walls hard enough to shatter ribs but not kill. Incapacitated, not dead.
The distinction felt important somehow, even as chaos raged. Across the chamber, Draven drove Malrek against one of the empty thrones. Their blades locked, faces inches apart, both men breathing hard and bleeding from multiple wounds. Malrek spoke through gritted teeth. Words Selene couldn't hear over the battle, but could read in the venom twisting his expression. Draven responded with something that looked like a snarl. Then he twisted violently, breaking the blade lock and driving his sword through Malrek's guard and into his uncle's chest. The chamber seemed to freeze. Malrek's eyes went wide. His blade clattered to the floor. Both hands gripped Draven's sword, where it pierced through armor and flesh and emerged red from his back. The fighting slowed, stopped, everyone turning to witness the moment that would define everything that followed. Draven held his uncle upright by the sword for a long moment. Their eyes locked. Whatever passed between them, rage or regret or recognition, remained private. Then Draven pulled the blade free and Malrek collapsed, dead before he hit stone. Silence crashed through the crimson conclave hall like a physical weight. Draven stood over the body of his father's brother, blood dripping from his sword, wounded and exhausted but still upright, still defiant. He turned toward the surviving lords and their remaining guards. His voice when he spoke carried absolute authority despite the exhaustion underneath. "Stand down. All of you. This ends now. Anyone who continues fighting faces execution for treason. Anyone who surrenders keeps their life and standing. Choose." The calculation happened fast. Without Malrek leading them, the conspiracy had no center, no coordination, just scattered supporters suddenly realizing they'd bet on the wrong side. Weapons lowered slowly, guards backing away from combat, lords remaining in the chamber kneeling in submission or fleeing toward exits. The civil war that should have torn the empire apart lasted less than 15 minutes, ended with one man dead and a king still standing. Selene crossed to Draven immediately. Her hands glowed golden as healing power flowed before conscious thought. She pressed palms against his wounds, feeling flesh knitting under her touch, feeling his pain transferring through the connection before dissipating. "Thank you," Draven murmured. "But save your strength. This isn't over yet." He was right. The fighting had stopped, but the political aftermath was just beginning. The surviving High Council lords gathered slowly. 7 remained, 4 who'd supported Draven from the start, 3 who'd leaned toward Malrek but withdrawn when their leader fell. They looked shaken, terrified, uncertain what came next when the balance of power had just shifted so dramatically. Draven addressed them with his wounds still healing under Selene's hands, with Malrek's corpse cooling at his feet, with blood painting his armor and exhaustion lining his face. "This empire stands at a threshold," he said quietly, voice carrying despite speaking barely above conversational volume. "We can continue as we have for centuries, maintaining hierarchies that elevate bloodlines and discard anyone inconvenient. Or we can acknowledge that system is broken and start building something different." One of the lords found courage to speak. "Your Majesty, with respect, today's violence proves exactly why tradition matters. Without established order, we descend into chaos. And yet," Draven countered, "tradition would have let Selene Vale freeze to death for being rejected by her mate. Tradition treats Omegas as property, treats commoners as expendable. Tradition is why half of you supported a coup attempt rather than trusting that change might be necessary." He gestured toward Selene. "She saved General Kaelor with abilities none of you believed existed. She survived assassination attempts because she's stronger than your prejudices assume. She stands here now not because I'm protecting her, but because she's proven capable of protecting herself. And you're still trying to categorize her as either threat or tool instead of recognizing her as a person who deserves autonomy." The Lord shifted uncomfortably. Draven continued. "So here's what happens next. We rebuild the Imperial Council with new membership. We establish laws protecting Omegas from forced bonding and rejection without cause. We open royal academies to merit-based enrollment instead of bloodline. We shift from inherited power toward earned authority." "Your Majesty," another lord protested, "such changes would destabilize..." "Everything," Draven interrupted. "Yes, they will destabilize everything. But the alternative is maintaining a corrupt system until it collapses catastrophically instead of reforming deliberately. I'd rather control the chaos than be destroyed by it." And if we refuse? The question came from Lord Varansk of the Southern Reaches, one of the undecided lords who'd watched the battle without committing fully to either side. Draven's expression hardened. Then you join Malrek. Simple as that. Because I'm done negotiating with nobles who think their comfort matters more than justice. Done pretending the Empire's brutality is necessary rather than traditional. This changes now. With you or despite you. Choose. The silence stretched. Then Lord Varansk knelt. Slowly, deliberately, making the statement clear. The Southern Reaches support the Crown, and the reforms your Majesty proposes. One by one, the other lords followed. Some enthusiastically, some reluctantly. All of them understanding that resistance meant death and compliance meant survival. The political revolution happened in minutes, forced through by a king willing to kill his own blood and face civil war rather than compromise. It shouldn't have worked. Should have fractured the empire permanently. But sometimes survival required believing impossible things, required choosing progress over tradition even when the cost felt unbearable. The lords departed to spread word of Malrek's death and the coming changes. Guards began clearing bodies and wounded from the chamber. Servants arrived to start the long process of cleaning blood from stone. Draven sagged once the immediate crisis passed, the adrenaline and authority draining away to reveal someone utterly exhausted underneath. Selene caught him before he collapsed, supported his weight despite her own exhaustion from healing. "We need to get you to Corwin," she said. "We need to get both of us somewhere private," Draven replied, "before I pass out in front of everyone and undermine everything we just accomplished." They made it back to Nightgrave through streets lined with citizens who'd emerged from shelter. Word of the battle had already spread. People watched their king return wounded but alive with the mysterious Omega supporting him. Some expressions held fear, some held curiosity. A few held something that looked almost like hope. Maybe change was possible after all. Maybe the Empire could evolve into something less cruel. Or maybe this was just the beginning of new problems disguised as solutions. Time would tell. In Draven's chambers, Corwin worked efficiently to treat wounds Selene's power hadn't fully closed, stitching cuts, wrapping ribs, applying salves and potions designed to prevent infection and accelerate recovery. "You'll live," Corwin pronounced finally. "Though you lost enough blood that bed rest for at least 3 days is mandatory." "Noted," Draven replied without committing to following orders. After Corwin left, Selene and Draven sat in silence, both too exhausted to speak, both processing what had just happened. Finally, Draven broke the quiet. "I killed my uncle today, my father's brother, the man who ruled as regent and kept the Empire stable through my childhood. I murdered family for you." The words carried no accusation, just statement of fact. Selene met his gaze. "I know, and I understand if you regret—" "I don't," Draven interrupted. "That's what terrifies me.